Hey guys, tonight we slip into Florence after the lamps have been doused and the sky has turned that velvet shade of blue where the stars haven't quite decided whether to show up. You walk narrow cobblestone alleys that smell faintly of bread, cooling in ovens and chamber pots emptied from second-story windows. The stones are slick, not just with rain but with the stories of centuries. Footsteps of merchants, lovers, thieves, and most importantly for tonight, spies. You probably won't survive this, but isn't that the thrill? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love for you to drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're listening. It's always fascinating to see this sleepy little community stretch across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into the night's journey together. You tug your cloak tighter around your shoulders because the night air in Florence clings like wet silk. Every whisper bounces from stone walls to wooden shutters, carrying secrets you're not meant to hear. This is not the Florence of sun-drenched frescoes and golden Madonnas. This is the Florence of hidden messages tucked into candle stubs and of velvet shadows that swallow you whole if you hesitate too long at a corner. The Medici family looms over the city like a shadow that casts more shadows. Their power stretches into palaces, markets, and chapels, but it also seeps into darker alleys where loyalty is tested not by words but by survival. The sound of a lute drifts from a nearby tavern, played just out of tune enough to tell you that the musician is drunk. A dog barks, then quickly quiets, as if reminded that barking too long after midnight might draw the wrong kind of attention. Even animals that know survival here depends on silence. And you, well, you keep moving. The trick to survival, you quickly realize, isn't just blending in. It's knowing how to be noticed for exactly the right things and ignored for everything else. That velvet night presses in and every choice becomes a test. Which alley to take, whose glance to meet, whose to avoid. Historians still argue whether Florence at night was truly more dangerous than Rome or Venice. But it doesn't matter to you. The fear feels real enough under your skin. You pass a shuttered apothecary, its sign creaking in the faint breeze. Behind those doors, powders are ground and distilled into liquids that could just as easily soothe a fever as stop a heart. Tonight, you think, the line between medicine and murder feels especially thin. There's a quirky record from the period noting that some apothecaries tested poisons on stray cats, and locals claimed you could tell which shops were deadlier by the silence of their alleyways. Superstition or not, you walk a little faster. The moonlight splinters through laundry lines strung across the alleys, catching damp linens like ghostly flags. Somewhere above, a woman whispers a prayer before bed, her voice too soft for words, but strong enough to remind you that in this city, everyone prays to survive another day, even if survival depends less on saints and more on secrets. Your boots echo in rhythm with your heartbeat, both trying to convince you that you belong here. But belonging is the most dangerous illusion. One wrong look, one misplaced gesture, and suddenly you're the stranger with too many questions. That's when you learn, in Renaissance Florence, information is currency, but silence is armor. And so, you slip deeper into the night, pulling your cloak closer, as though the fabric itself might shield you from the whispers that curl like smoke around every corner. Survival, you're beginning to understand, is not just about avoiding poison in your cup. It's about carrying yourself as if you were the poison others should avoid. You stand at the mouth of another alley. The lantern snuffs so thoroughly that even the stars struggle to pour light into the narrow gap between buildings. Florence breathes around you, the faint shuffle of sandals, a window slamming shut, the trickle of water from a gutter spout. Tonight, you are not yourself. You are a merchant. Or at least, that's what your velvet sleeves and padded doublet insist. Disguise is the first layer of survival, and if you sell the act well enough, no one will dare to peel it back. The Medici spies, everyone knows they're everywhere. Even though no one dares say it, prefer faces that blend. The trick isn't becoming invisible, it's becoming just ordinary enough to be ignored. Your false name, carefully chosen, sits on your tongue like a well-polished coin. You rehearse it in your mind as you walk, rolling syllables so naturally that even you almost believe it. Historians still argue whether such aliases were truly convincing or whether they were merely tokens of theater, but in this moment, you are grateful for the mask. Your velvet cuffs brush against your fingertips, a detail too fine for a tradesman, but too modest for a noble, just ambiguous enough. You could be a cloth merchant bringing bolts of fabric from Lucca, or a spice dealer ferrying cinnamon and pepper, the sense of faraway worlds lingering in your cloak. People in Florence love stories as much as they love goods, and sometimes the story sells faster than the merchandise. You catch your reflection in a darkened window, distorted by uneven glass. For a heartbeat, you don't recognize yourself, and that's a good thing. A spy survives not by clinging to identity, but by wearing it loosely like a borrowed cloak that can be tossed aside if it catches fire. The quirky truth? Renaissance Florence had entire districts where people dressed in exaggerated costumes for Carnival Week, blurring lines so wildly that real disguises sometimes went unnoticed. Your false merchant's attire might be dull compared to a man dressed as a lion or a woman masked as Fortuna herself, but dullness tonight is survival. You pass another figure huddled by a doorway, their face hidden, their hand extended for alms. For a moment you wonder, beggar or lookout? In this city, pity is a luxury, and so you nod, drop a copper coin, and move on. The real gift isn't the coin, it's the gesture of ordinary kindness that makes you seem harmless. Inside the tavern, your role sharpens. You order a pitcher of sour wine with the casual ease of someone who has done so 100 times. The barkeep glances at your sleeves, then at your boots. Not noble, not poor, just merchant enough. You sip the wine, it tastes of iron nails and wet wood, but survival is rarely palatable. Every conversation at nearby tables is a note in the great symphony of Florence's politics. Two men mutter about wool taxes. A pair of women argue over a dowry contract. A drunken craftsman boasts about a cousin painting ceilings for a Medici cousin. All of it is useful, none of it is safe, and you, hidden in plain sight, sip and listen. Historians still debate whether spies of the era truly relied on elaborate disguises, or whether most intelligence came from bribery and loose tongues. But here, wrapped in velvet and false names, you realize it's not an either-or, it's both. The disguise keeps suspicion low, while the gossip keeps information high. Without one, the other collapses. Your false name comes into play when a man in gray approaches. His eyes linger just a little too long, his smile just a little too practiced. And you are, he asks. You bow slightly, rehearse syllables, slipping free like wine from a jug. He nods, satisfied, and for now, you survive. Still, you know this game never ends. A disguise is only the opening note of the song. Eventually, someone hums the melody back to you and notices if you've missed a beat. But for tonight, your velvet sleeves and borrowed name hold. The merchant's mask is secure. And in Florence, that's enough to keep you breathing one more hour. The tavern grows louder as the night drags on, mugs clinking against rough-hewn tables, chairs scraping on uneven floors, voices rising and falling in waves of laughter and suspicion. You nurse your sour wine and keep your ears sharp. But survival is not only about listening, It's about carrying secrets from one pair of lips to another without ever letting them fall to the floor. That's where the couriers come in, and tonight you follow the invisible trail they leave behind. You spot one now, a boy no older than 12, weaving between benches with a basket of loaves. His bare feet slap the floor, his grin innocent, his job seemingly simple. But you know better. Inside those loaves might be something more than bread. Renaissance Florence invented creative ways to hide letters, hollowed out walking sticks, false bottom chests, even cheeses carved with messages scratched into the rind. But bread is clever. No one suspects the crust that fills hungry mouths to also carry the weight of whispered treason. The boy delivers a loaf to a man in a corner booth, his cloak too fine for the smoky tavern. The man tears it open, and for a fleeting second, you see the parchment folded inside before it disappears into his sleeve. He chews the crust with theatrical ease, as though it is the bread he came for. But you see the way his fingers tighten around his cup. He has something now, something worth killing for, or dying to protect. Historians still argue whether such tales of coated bread are exaggerations spun by later storytellers, but accounts survive from merchant diaries, hinting that Florence's bakers were sometimes more valuable than notaries. After all, who would question a baker? A quirky detail survives. One baker was fined not for hiding letters, but for failing to salt his bread properly, which led some scholars to joke that bland bread was more dangerous than secret ink. You step outside into the cool night where couriers move more freely. A man passes by leaning on a cane. The head of the cane gleams like polished walnut, but you know it is hollow. A false walking stick can carry messages, small vials of liquid, or even a scrap of poison dust, disguised as nothing more than a pilgrim's aid. Survival here is not about swords clashing. It is about who can smuggle whispers across a border faster. You follow the boy with the bread a little farther, his route twisting through alleys. He pauses once, glancing over his shoulder. His eyes meet yours, and for a moment you're certain he knows you're watching. But then he runs on, vanishing into the dark with all the energy of a child and none of the innocence. You exhale. In this game, even children are pawns, but pawns that sometimes outlive kings. At a corner, a courier exchanges a loaf for a coin, the parchment inside already promised to someone else. You can almost hear the paper crinkle, the ink drying, the secret shifting hands faster than any army moves. It's a quiet war, fought not with pikes and armor, but with crusts and crumbs. You lean against the wall, cloak wrapped around you, heart steady. This is how spies survive, not by carrying the sharpest blade, but by sending the sharpest words wrapped in the dullest packages. Tonight, you are part of that network. Not a hero, not a villain, just one more figure moving secrets across a city that pretends to sleep. And somewhere in the dark, someone else is watching you, deciding if your survival story ends with the next loaf of bread. You follow the smell before you see the door. Vinegar, hot metal, and something green and bitter that makes the back of your tongue tingle. The shutters of the apothecary are latched, but a sliver of lamplight leaks into the alley like a secret that refuses to stay put. You knock once, then again, the pattern you were told, and a latch clicks. A narrow face appears, framed by a nightcap that suggests the owner went to bed hours ago and never quite learned how to wake up kindly. You show a coin. The face becomes friendlier. Coins have a miraculous effect on bedside manners. Inside, the workshop is a forest of glass and copper. Alembics squat over coals. Wormy coils drip into flasks. Mortars, some of marble, some of rough stone, hold powdered leaves that smell of kitchen gardens with trust issues. A cat patrols the rafters with the stiff dignity of a guild inspector. You breathe shallowly because every scent seems to promise either vigor or doom. Rue, rosemary, myrrh, camphor like cold lightning. A whiff of quicksilver, silvery and metallic, the kind of smell that makes you believe in moons. The apothecary weighs your coin, then weighs you with his eyes, and finally weighs a few grains of something in a brass scale so sensitive a sigh could tip it. For sleep, you say, keeping your voice level. Not untrue. Your patrons want to sleep and never wake, or wake and never fear sleep again. In Renaissance cities, apothecaries sit in the overlap between medicine and mystery. Guild statutes, inventories, fines. Those are mainstream facts of their trade, and the city keeps an eye on them the way a cat keeps an eye on a roasting goose. Yet, everyone knows that with the right whisper and the right price, a remedy can become a remedy's shadow. On a high shelf, a glazed jar reads Theriaca in tidy letters. He notices your gaze, smiles, and taps the label with a fingernail, as if to say, "Of course we have the good stuff. Theriac, treacle de some, a legendary compound syrup, cooked in public ceremonies in Venice and other proud cities, stirred for hours while officials watched, then sealed and dated like wine. It's a universal antidote, they say. It carries a bit of viper flesh, dozens of herbs, and a steady kiss of opium to soften the world at the edges." Historians still argue whether the famous Theriac actually neutralizes poison or merely comforts wealthy nerves with expensive sweetness, but no one argues about its price. The apothecary tilts the jar. The dark syrup crawls like honey that read too many tragedies. Beside it sit packets labeled with counsels more ambiguous. Realgar and orpiment, yellow and orange arsenic sulfides that glow like sunrise in a world where sunrise can be fatal. A small horn, too small for a cow, too spiraled for comfort, rests on a silk cloth. You run a finger near it, but not on it. The apothecary raises a brow. "Unicorn," he says, with a smile that means narwhal. The courts adore it as a talisman. Cups were carved from it, and spoons too, on the principle that a glittering myth is sometimes the best bodyguard money can buy. A quirky tidbit? Some households tested drink by dipping such a horn and waiting for bubbles or smoke. An expensive way to learn that superstition has very patient lungs. You mention a ring, casual as a yawn. The apothecary's eyes flick to your hands and back to the fire. "Many customers prefer signets," he says, "for wax and for other applications." He brings out a tray of fittings, tiny screws, hair-thin glass vials, waxes that melt at different temperatures. "Your friend would want something viscous," he adds, and stirs a small pot until it thickens to the texture of fear. Too thin and it spills, too thick and it won't flow on cue. You nod like someone who definitely understands rheology at midnight. He crushes dried leaves with steady rhythm, tap, tap, grind, mixing them with a dust of something mineral. He names the herbs in a gentle chant: rue for strength, sage for steadiness, pennyroyal for discretion. You make a note to never drink a minty tisane from this man unless accompanied by 3 witnesses and a priest. He adds cantharides, blister beetle, to a separate mortar, not for killing but for distracting. A rash can be as useful as a dagger if timed correctly. Diversion is an antidote of its own, he says, and you file that away next to Breadhide's letters and Sour Winehide's nerves. From a drawer he pulls a ledger. Columns of names and payments march like little parades of plausible deniability. The city requires such books. Inspectors may arrive, and the guild prefers order to scandal. You read upside down, as spies do: lady with headaches, porter with worms, servant with sleeplessness, gentleman with sleepless enemies. You don't smile. Humor is best saved for when no one is recording your purchases in neat brown ink. Still, a small joke escapes. You ask if he has anything for people who buy too many things for people who can't sleep. He snorts, which in apothecarial language is practically a cackle. By the hearth, a copper bath cradles an alembic. The apothecary shows you the slow drip, drip, drip of a distillate so clear it seems indecent. Spirit of wine, that is distilled alcohol, will carry powders through narrow channels and evaporate quickly, leaving behind a bitter whisper on a seal or a napkin or a ring's tiny lip. He moves with the economy of someone who has done this many times and intends to do it many more. Historians still argue whether poison rings, as commonly imagined, were frequent tools or rare contrivances later romanticized by novelists. They point to a handful of surviving examples, while also noting that larger conspiracies typically preferred a kitchen and a gullible cupbearer. You, however, are curating options. Rings travel where kitchens cannot. He lifts a small tin stamped with a vine pattern. Inside, a gray-green paste smells of almonds, and something like old leaves caught in rain. Laurel, bitter almonds, a breath of orpiment, he murmurs. A breath, such a pretty measurement. He dabs the paste onto a signet's hidden hinge, wipes the excess with a cloth already stained by other careful evenings, and demonstrates the pressure needed to release a smear no larger than a raindrop. Most people use too much, he says. They want a storm when a drizzle will do. Somewhere beyond the shutters, the city clocks agree with him and refuse to chime all at once. You ask for antidotes as well. Survival is a two-handed art. He pours a dram of theriac into a paper twist, adds a vial of syruped poppy, and suggests slices of bezoar scraped like chocolate curls. Yes, bezoar, a stone from the stomach of a goat, adopted by courts like a pet rock with ambitions. The cat on the rafter yawns, perfectly timed, as if to say that goats are amateurs at storing stones compared to felines storing grudges. He lowers his voice. Heat releases some inks, he says, nodding toward a small brazier where a blank sheet darkens to reveal letters in walnut brown ghosts. Lemon, alum, iron salts, messages that hide until the right warmth wakes them. You file that too with bread and canes and the cheerful habit secrets have of traveling disguised as groceries. Payment is quick, a pouch for you, a nod from him, and the understanding that neither of you likes to meet twice in the same week. At the door you pause and ask, as if idly, whether the city sees more poisonings than rumors suggest. He shrugs so slightly it could be dust falling. Rumors are cheaper than ingredients, he says. Historians still argue whether fear outpaced fact in Renaissance courts, whether whispers of arsenic did more governing than arsenic itself. Out in the alley, the air tastes cleaner, but only because the workshop taught you what every smell might be hiding. You pull your cloak close, careful of the new weight near your wrist. The paste sits in its tiny chamber, patient as midnight, while the antidote waits in your pocket like a modest hymn. Remember the boy with bread? The city runs on ordinary things carrying extraordinary burdens. Now you carry them too. You step back into Florence, your breath slowed, your pace unhurried, as though you have only purchased a sleeping draft for a neighbor and not the possibility of sleep forever. Joke 3, very small, just for you. If anyone asks, you bought something for the cat. The guild inspector. The alley receives you like a folded map. You choose a route the way the apothecary chose his measurements. Not too direct, not too slow, just enough to keep living. You walk with your left hand tucked close to your ribs, testing the weight you carry at your knuckle. The signet feels ordinary, a polite oval of metal with your borrowed crest. But ordinary things are where Florence hides its most impolite intentions. The bezel sits a touch higher than fashion would prefer. If anyone notices, you will shrug and call it vanity. If no one notices, you will call it survival. In the alley's shadow, you stop, raise your hand, and let moonlight pool across the ring. From the apothecary's bench to your finger, the mechanism has crossed a tiny frontier, from possibility to responsibility. The hinge is a hair's breadth of brass, smoothed so carefully that touch alone could not find it. A minuscule screw, no wider than a poppy seed, keeps the lid obedient. Beneath it waits the gray-green paste that breathes almonds and wet leaves, the drizzle-not storm the apothecary recommended. Somehow, the smallest raindrops make the loudest promises. You practice the gesture you were taught. Lift the thumb, press along the signet shoulder, feel the hinge soften into motion, then roll your wrist as if checking the time on a very tiny, very judgmental sundial. The lid opens just enough to smear the faintest crescent along a surface. Glass, wood, glove, the rim of a cup, and then it snaps shut with the softest click, a lullaby for conspirators. A second touch along a screw tightens or loosens the flow, the difference between a kiss and a monsoon. You whisper to your own hands to behave. There's a more respectable use for a signet, of course. In every palazzo in Tuscany, signet rings press wax into obedience, leaving a crest that says, "I meant this." That mainstream fact is why your ring will pass glances. To the world, it is a tool for letters. To you, it is a letter of introduction into the quiet corners of fear. You picture yourself sealing a folded note and quite accidentally letting the ring's lip brush a waiting goblet. Accident is a reliable colleague. You move again, keeping pace with your breath. The street smells of cooled brick and the faint singe of lamp wicks recently snuffed. A pair of lovers argue in whispers too soft to decipher. You pass them with the distracted air of someone counting coin in his head. Inside your palm, the ring pulses like an irrelevant heartbeat that nevertheless insists on being heard. Quirky detail, not every poison ring ever made was born to murder. Some were vinaigrettes, tiny hinged lockets meant to hold a sponge steeped in aromatic vinegar, a portable sanctuary against the odors of drains, markets, and mortality. Others carried mementos, twists of hair, miniature portraits, a fragment of a saint's ribbon, and only later did rumor dress them in darker clothes. You consider fitting a dab of rosemary inside to claim you are merely a devotee of cleanliness. Joke one, whispered, you'll say you are armed with hygiene. You test grip and angle. The human body is fussier than any apothecary. Too much pressure and the lid pops when you bow. Too little and it refuses to open when politeness requires it. You adjust the screw a fraction and bow to the night air until you can lower your head without baptizing your own sleeve. You swap the ring briefly to the other hand, discover your left is steadier than your right, and decide that ambidexterity is an underrated antidote. Past the corner, a glassmaker's workshop rests like a sleeping dragon. You imagine the ring's paste meeting smooth Venetian glass, the smear invisible until heat or wine coaxes its voice. Historians still argue whether the famous poison rings were common tools of Renaissance agents or rare curios elevated by later storytellers. But the surviving examples, compartments beneath bezels, pivoting stones, spring latches as fussy as courtiers, prove that craftspeople had both the skill and the imagination. You are not here for legend, you are here for leverage. At a fountain, you wash your free hand, then study the crest again. The fox engraved atop your bezel is borrowed from a minor house that loves cunning and hates accounting. The lines are clean, the tail a flourish that could hide a seam. If anyone asks why your seal looks freshly cut, you will sigh about a goldsmith's enthusiasm. On the inner band, a motto is engraved upside down so that only the wearer can read it. Endure to endure. You did not commission it, but it fits anyhow. You rehearse the plausible stories that wrap around the ring like ribbon around a gift. If a steward notices you keeping your hands away from platters, you will say you have an old burn. If a lady asks to study the crest, you will claim it is too modest to be interesting. If a servant blurts that you never take the ring off, you will smile and say sentimentality is your least dangerous vice. Humor disarms more quickly than daggers, at least until daggers arrive. Joke 2. You'll claim to be married to your work, and the ring is the spouse. At the edge of the square, a trio of men fleeing dice on a barrel. You drift close enough to watch without participating. One licks his thumb before he throws, a habit you make a note of, because habits write maps. A ring requires a map, the who, the when, the where, and the never. Never when you are angry, never when you are watched, never when you are unsure whether the antidote is closer than the accusation. You build your own set of rules, the way a ship's captain draws soundings, patiently, privately, marking shoals no one else can see. You remember the apothecary's ledger, gentlemen with sleepless enemies. You now qualify for both nouns. To calm your pulse, you count the tools you carry. A glove with a stitch patch that helps you wipe the ring clean without leaving a telltale shine. A folded scrap of wax to rehearse sealing, because the more convincingly you use the ring for letters, the less anyone will imagine you use it for letters of another sort. A length of twine, because twine solves problems you have not met yet. Joke 3. You tell yourself that if everything fails, you will tie the problem in a bow and declare it a gift. The debate you have avoided returns. Is the ring protection or temptation? You tell yourself it is ballast, something that keeps you steady in rough water. Still, you feel its weight tug at decisions, offering shortcuts that good sense would rather walk around. You rehearse antidotes again, the Theriac sweetness, the Bezoar scraped shavings, the hope that belief itself damps panic long enough for real remedies to matter. The mind poisons faster than any paste. A moth flutters around a lantern above a doorway, committing itself again and again to the same dangerous orbit. You laugh quietly because you see yourself in its stubborn circles. The ring is both flame and wing. Survival depends on knowing when to circle and when to fly. Tonight, you walk on, hand closed, seal hidden, step steady. The tavern shutters rattle behind you as the night exhales into the alley. The sour wine still buzzes faintly on your tongue, a memory of oak barrels and iron nails. But now your ears adjust to the softer soundscape. Footsteps on stone, the squeak of cartwheels over cobbles, and the low murmur of voices pitched carefully not to carry. This is the hour when Florence's spies loosen their collars and lean toward each other over sticky tables, whispering truths they'll later deny. You pick one such tavern tonight, the kind where the straw on the floor covers more spills than it soaks. Inside, the air is thick with pipe smoke, spiced meat, and the sweat of men who prefer shadows to sunlight. You settle at a corner table, mug in hand, and tilt your head just enough to catch the conversations that matter. This is the art of eavesdropping, and like most arts in the Renaissance, it thrives best in taverns. On the table nearest you, two men mutter about a shipment of alum, essential for the dye trade, and therefore a lever on half the city's economy. Mainstream fact: Florence's woolen cloth industry was the city's beating heart, its guilds so powerful they shaped laws. Controlling alum meant controlling color, and controlling color meant controlling fashion, taxes, and reputations. The men are no merchants, though. Their eyes dart like sparrows. Their words carry the weight of a bribe. Farther along, a group of students argue about philosophy, quoting Aristotle between gulps of cheap Chianti. One insists that the soul resides in the liver, another bets it sleeps in the heart, and the third laughs that the soul is wherever the rent money isn't. You smirk into your mug. Joke 1. You silently nominate the stomach as the soul's most frequent address. At the far end, a singer plucks at a lute, her voice lilting in verses about courtly love, but her audience pays more attention to her pauses than her rhymes. Between lines, she slips whispered phrases to a man hunched beside her, his cloak far too fine for this smoky room. You angle your ear and catch only fragments. Tonight, Rivergate, alone. Not love poetry then, but instructions. A courier disguised as entertainment, and a noble foolish enough to fetch secrets with his ears instead of his servants. Historians still argue whether taverns were truly hotbeds of espionage, or simply where people went to complain about taxes. The surviving arrest records show both. One Florentine chronicler quipped that half the city's plots were born between spilled wine and overcooked sausage. You sip and nod. Sausage has a way of inspiring ambition. You lean back, pretending to drowse, while your hand brushes your signet ring under the table. The hinge is steady, the pace still waiting. You don't intend to use it here. This tavern thrives on words, not cups, but touching it anchors you, like a sailor tapping wood before a storm. Quirky tidbit. Some spies carried hollow coins, called piombi, to slip messages through city walls or across checkpoints. Drop one in the street and no guard would think twice. In fact, stories tell of gamblers losing hollow coins at dice tables, their secrets rolled away with the bones. You glance at the gamblers nearby and wonder how many secrets are rattling with their wagers. Your wine is refilled by a serving girl who does not meet your eyes. She hums faintly though, and you notice the tune matches the lute player's pauses. A cawed in plain sound, you tip lightly, just enough to seem polite, not enough to seem curious. Politeness keeps you safe. Curiosity gets you gutted in alleys. At the next table, a man with a scar across his jaw tells a story about how the Duke of Milan drinks only from cups carved of horn to avoid glass being poisoned. Unicorn horn, he declares, though you know it's narwhal. The listeners gasp anyway, the way people gasp at miracles. Joke 2. You consider marketing goat hooves as a budget version. The tavern door swings open, letting in a draft that makes candles shudder. A cloaked stranger enters, carrying the cold with him. Everyone glances, then looks away too quickly. That is how you know he matters. He chooses no table, only stands by the hearth as though warming hands. You realize he's listening too, listening harder than anyone else. For a moment, your reflection in his gaze is a warning. You are not the only spider in this web. The tavern grows rowdy again. Dice clattering, songs slurring, voices tangling. You rise slowly, leave a few coins, and drift toward the door. Outside, the night air tastes cleaner, as though you've stepped out of a broth into fresh water. You've gathered enough whispers to last until morning. The secrets will echo in your head as you walk, but the trick is not letting them follow you home. Survival in Florence means knowing when to stop listening before the walls start whispering back. Joke 3. You remind yourself that if walls do whisper, you'll charge them rent. You walk away from the tavern, the night air cooler now, sharp enough to clear the fog of sour wine. The streets are quiet, but the quiet is deceptive. Florence never truly sleeps. It only pretends so that betrayals can move more easily under its cloak. You keep your pace measured, cloak drawn, step steady, because tonight you must play the most dangerous role of all, the false friend. The banquet hall is already glowing when you arrive, light spilling from tall arched windows like molten gold onto the cobblestones. Inside, laughter clatters almost as loudly as the cutlery. You are announced by name, not your name of course, but the one you wear for this mask. The nobleman hosting tonight is a Medici cousin, which means every smile at his table hides teeth. You take your place and you smile too, teeth sheathed, waiting. The table stretches so long you could march an army across it. Platters of roasted fowl gleam, grapes sweat with sweetness, and cheeses ooze politely onto silver. Your ring feels heavier than usual as your hand hovers near the goblet set before you. Mainstream fact: banquets in Renaissance. Florence were both feasts and stages. Every dish, every toast, every seating arrangement carried political meaning. Sitting 2 seats closer to the host could mean favor or suspicion. You lean toward the man beside you, whose velvet doublet is embroidered with hunting dogs. His words drip like honey, but his eyes dart, measuring. He asks where you trade, and you conjure the details with ease. Cloth from Lucca, pepper from Lisbon, the right mix of believable and boring. Joke 1. You say your most valuable cargo is patience, and he laughs just enough to mark you safe for now. Platters pass, and you take only a little, careful to seem neither greedy nor cautious. Across the table, a woman sips wine, but her eyes never leave the goblet of the man beside her. You catch the detail and tuck it away. Every glance at this table is a sentence in an unwritten book. The trick is reading without being caught with your eyes on the page. Quirky tidbit. Records show that some Renaissance diners brought their own knives and spoons to banquets, unwilling to trust the host's utensils. Forks, still rare in Italy, were regarded by some as devilishly effeminate, though the Venetians adored them. You glance at your knife, polished and plain, and imagine how many hands it might have passed through before resting at your place. Survival at table is not only about food, but about the instruments that carry it. The Medici cousin rises, toasting with words too polished to be sincere. You echo the toast with a nod, careful to let your ringed hand rise naturally. The crest gleams in candlelight, no more suspicious than the dozens of other signets on display. The hinge remains invisible, its promise silent, but you feel the pulse of potential under the gold. Historians still argue whether poison was as common at Renaissance banquets as the rumors suggest, or whether the fear of poison itself did most of the work. Tonight, you see how fear alone flavors the wine. No one drinks deeply. Everyone glances sidelong before raising the cup. Even the laughter carries a tightness, as if throats are wary of letting anything too far down. Your friend with the hunting dogs leans closer. He speaks warmly of future ventures, shared profits, and noble connections. His hand rests on your shoulder in that exaggerated way men use when they plan something dangerous. You laugh with him, matching his energy, but in your chest you know friendship here is currency minted from suspicion. You must spend carefully or end penniless. Another guest spills wine across the table, and for a second the entire room seizes. Every gaze fixed on the goblet, the spill, the hand that trembles. The woman beside him dabs at the cloth too quickly, and you think yes, she was waiting for that. Perhaps she hoped the spill would carry more than Chianti. Perhaps not. But the fear has already done its work. Joke 2. You remind yourself that nothing sours wine faster than company. The banquet resumes, though the laughter rings thinner now. You play your role, nodding at stories, laughing in rhythm, agreeing with opinions you do not share. Friendship here is performance, but the performance keeps you alive. The fox on your ring glints as you raise your goblet once more, and you think it fitting. Every fox survives by pretending to be a dog until the hounds pass by. You will leave tonight with more allies than you entered, though none of them are true. They will invite you again, smile at you in markets, clasp your hand in courtyards, all while plotting how to use or undo you. And you will do the same, because in Florence, betrayal is simply another way of saying good evening. Joke 3. You wonder if the banquet's motto should be printed on napkins. Eat, drink, distrust. The banquet fades behind you, but the night does not let you go. Florence is still awake, only in another rhythm. Less laughter, more bargaining. You step onto a narrow bridge and follow the current of voices drifting from the Rialto-style market stalls that flourish even after sundown. Venice may be leagues away, but her spirit has slipped into Florence's veins. Trade never sleeps, and secrets sell best at night. The market is a quilt of flickering lanterns, their glow staining bolts of silk and jewel tones, sapphire, emerald, blood red. Merchants call in half whispers, coaxing passers-by with promises of fabric spun in Persia, glass from Murano, spices worth their weight in coin. But you're not here for silk or saffron. You're here for the things that aren't on the stalls, the things traded between glances. You pause at a spice table, inhaling the sharp heat of peppercorns and the sweet drift of cinnamon. The merchant grins, gestures to a small packet wrapped in wax paper. Nutmeg, he says, but his eyes tell you it might be something else. Quirky tidbit. Nutmeg was so valuable in this era that whole islands were fought over it. Historians still argue whether its medicinal claims were believed sincerely or exaggerated for profit. But tonight, nutmeg doubles as plausible cover. A vial of pale powder tucked under spice is invisible to every nose but yours. You wander deeper, past a man selling brass scales so delicate they can weigh a single hair. He boasts that his customers include apothecaries, jewelers, and others who must be precise. You know the others. You glance down at your signet and imagine the powder it carries being measured on scales like these, each grain worth more than a purse of florins if applied in the right place. The night market is full of voices and masks. A woman in a lace veil haggles over a packet of crushed herbs, too fine to season soup, too bitter to heal wounds. A young man offers you figs, but the price he whispers is for more than fruit. You shake your head, feigning disinterest, but the detail is filed away. Information is the true spice here. Everything else is garnish. At one stall, a seller unfurls sheets of paper so smooth they gleam like skin. From Venice, he insists, the best for letters. He taps a stack and smiles knowingly. You wonder how many invisible inks will soak into those pages, how many secrets will travel across the Alps disguised as grocery lists. You buy a pouch of saffron, bright golden threads that smell faintly of hay. To anyone watching, you are just another merchant preparing for trade, but tucked into the saffron is a vial so small it disappears against your palm. The merchant doesn't name it and you don't ask. In markets like this, survival is built on silence. Historians still debate whether poisons truly circulated so openly in Renaissance markets, or whether stories like this are embroidered with hindsight. But it's undeniable that the overlap of medicine and malice was a marketplace of its own. Apothecaries sold rue for fevers, yet rue brewed stronger could still a heartbeat. Spice merchants carried cinnamon for pies, and cinnamon bark steeped longer could mask the bitterness of arsenic. The line was so thin that no lantern could ever light it clearly. You stop at a table where small glass bottles glisten like captured stars. The vendor rattles one gently, and the liquid inside glows faintly green in the lamplight. A cordial, he claims, to keep the stomach sweet. You nod, but the bitter edge in the scent tells you it could just as easily keep the stomach silent. Joke 1. You think it should be labeled cordial-ish. Nearby, two men argue in dialect about whether Venice or Florence commands more shadow in politics. Their voices rise, attracting scowls from other shoppers. One insists Venice owns the night with its masked balls and canals. The other swears Florence rules with its bankers and their invisible gold. You smile to yourself. Historians still argue the same question, but here in the market, the debate ends when a guard strolls by and both men vanish. Survival beats philosophy every time. You move on, deeper into the maze of stalls where torches burn low and buyers become fewer. Here the goods are quieter, powders and folded parchment, rings that gleam too heavy for ornament, small knives disguised as brooches. You pass without stopping, but you memorize faces. The crooked nose of a man selling remedies, the quick eyes of a woman who doesn't speak but gestures prices with her fingers. Tonight, you're not buying weapons, you're buying knowledge. Joke 2, you decide the market sells everything but sleep. As you exit, the air feels cleaner, though the weight in your pouch and on your finger says otherwise. You've walked among silks and saffron, but what you carry out is more dangerous than all the velvet in Florence. The night market thrives because it speaks two languages, one of trade, one of secrets, and you now speak both fluently. A bell tolls from a distant church, marking the late hour. The stalls begin to fold like paper swans, lanterns pinched out, voices retreating into the dark. You walk away, saffron safe, ring steady, cloak drawn. Florence exhales, and so do you. Joke 3. You tell yourself the only thing you truly bought tonight was indigestion. The market's lantern smoke still clings to your cloak when you reach the little perfumer's door. A narrow place tucked between a moneylender and a shop that sells devotional candles, as if sin and sanctity agreed to share a wall. A bell tinkles when you enter, and the world turns immediately soft. Rose, orange blossom, violet, a shadow of musk that feels like velvet in the lungs. You tell yourself not to breathe too deeply. Florence has taught you that even sweetness can carry teeth. You're here for paper. Specifically, paper that already smells like a secret. The perfumer brings out thin sheets burnished with a smooth stone until they shine faintly. Each sheet stored with lavender, benzoin, and a whisper of ambergris. The scent isn't a scream. It's a story that waits for the right reader. You think of the apothecary's theriac and the drizzle knot storm paste inside your ring. Good things in Florence work quietly. You pay, and in the alley you write by lantern stub. A hand so practiced the letters look bored. The message is brief, built on the whispers you lifted from the lute player's pauses. Tonight, Rivergate, alone. Not an order, an invitation sharpened into a plan. You dust the ink with ground pumice to fix it, then fold the page the way you were taught, not merely once or twice, but locked, slit through itself, tucked, so that opening it leaves a scar in the paper. Mainstream fact. Such letter locking tricks were common in Renaissance Europe. Slits, tabs, waxes, and clever folds that turned sheets into self-sealing puzzles. You warm a little wax, press your fox signet, and the crest settles like a wink that says, I meant this. Perfume last. A single touch of orange flower along the fold, just enough to smuggle the note into someone's memory through the nose. The scent is not only disguise, it's an alibi. Lovers' letters are supposed to smell like this. Orders to change the future are not. Joke 1, whispered to the page. You hope the perfume works faster than gossip. The addressee is waiting in a palazzo 2 bridges away, a mistress. The polite word for a woman who stands close enough to power to warm her hands and cinch her sleeves. She is no fool. The foolish do not last long within arm's reach of men who collect enemies like tapestries. Your task is simple and therefore dangerous. Deliver the letter as if it were a trifle. Receive a trifle in return and leave no fingerprints on the story anyone will tell tomorrow. You set off, keeping to the narrowest streets where laundry lines hang like gray pennants of surrender. Twice you double back, once you pause to adjust a shoe, and once you tie that piece of twine, remember the twine, around your folded bundle of saffron so it bumps reassuringly against your hip. Nothing says harmless merchant like groceries. Nothing says danger like groceries that carry a vial. The palazzo's side door opens to your knock. A maid with a face that gives nothing away leads you along a corridor where portraits turn their painted heads to mind your business. The mistress receives you in a small room with too many cushions. the kind of luxury that hopes to pass for comfort. She is dressed for no one but herself. Hair unbound, a thin shawl, a ring on each hand that flashes like punctuation at the end of sentences she seldom finishes. You bow, you present the letter, you say, as rehearsed, that it comes from a mutual friend who prefers music to conversation. She does not reach for it at once. Instead, she studies your crest, your borrowed boots, the line your cloak makes, where it hides your shoulder. People who survive in rooms like this do not rush toward anything, not even their own secrets. At last, her fingers take the sheet. The perfume rises and her expression softens, but only the way water softens stone, slowly and never more than necessary. She breaks the seal. The folding forces her to decide. Either she understands the lock and opens it cleanly, or she tears it and learns that the message is less important than the record of who opened it. Her hands know the trick. Somewhere in her past, someone taught her to keep a letter's body unscarred. You feel an unprofessional pang of respect. Rivergate, she murmurs, barely moving her lips. Alone. She looks up and you see all the calculations pass through her gaze. She's not the sort of person anyone invites to be alone, least of all at a Rivergate. She tilts her head. And if I choose to go, you offer what you were told to offer. A small sachet sewn with lavender and grains of salt. Harmless, visible, a prop that says this was a love errand. The real prop is your scent. The room now carries a thread of orange blossom that will cling to your cloak and to her wrist. If anyone asks later, the story will be flowers, not plans. Historians still argue whether perfumes in this period serve mainly to mask city smells or to mask intentions, and whether famous poison tales, like the rumor that a queen died from perfumed gloves, were truth, slander, or the kind of wishful thinking enemies write in the margins. She tucks the letter into her sleeve as if slipping it into a vain, quirky tidbit. Some lovers in Italian courts kept perfumed pomanders, little metal apples pierced with holes, crammed with musk and herbs, swinging from belts like tame planets. In summer, people claimed you could tell who was newly in love by the small orbit of fragrance that preceded them down the stairs. You catch a glint of such a pomander on her table, its hinge ajar, and wonder how many messages have swung inside it. Joke 2, a love letter that doubles as a citrus. She asks a few ordinary questions. How fares the spice road? Is the price of pepper still rude? Will silk ever stop shedding dignity on the poor? You answer as ordinary merchants do, which is to say confidently, and with a number of facts that sound respectable. Mainstream fact returns like a host checking the table. Florence's fortunes still depend on cloth, banks, and the ability to make distant things feel near. Money, ideas, people. She listens as if your words were not the point, and of course they aren't. The point is how easily you lie about boring things. Boring lies are the safest kind. When she rises, the interview is over. She slips a coin into your hand, too much, and you attempt a ritual protest. She insists. The coin's weight is not payment. It's a receipt that says we did this. You bow again, and the ring on your finger brushes your palm with an unmistakable reminder. Drizzle, not storm, not tonight. You leave as you came, escorted by a maid who's either loyal or excellent at acting loyal. In this city, the difference is measured in breaths. On the street, you do the thing that saves your life more often than any antidote. You do not look back. You turn 2 corners, past a shuttered baker whose alley is silent. Remember the superstition about cats and apothecaries, and let the room's perfume fade until the night resumes its own scent of stone and river. You feel the fox on your signet cool against your skin. The letter is no longer yours. Your task is completed, which is to say your danger has merely changed shape. Joke 3, to steady your breath. You decide that if anyone stops you, you will claim to be a traveling nose evaluating Florence for civic improvements. More lavender, fewer conspiracies. At the bridge you pause. The Arno slides underneath like ink spilled deliberately. If the mistress goes to the river gate, someone will be waiting with a different kind of perfume, fear sharpened by air moving over water. If she does not, someone else will rewrite the next hour. You cannot control which. You can only keep walking the narrow seam between fragrance and fable, between messages that open cleanly and those that tear in the wrong hands. Survival tonight smells like orange blossom and cool stone, and you carry both away into the dark. The river air chills your lungs as you leave the palazzo behind. Lanterns flicker across the Arno, their light breaking into trembling paths that vanish as quickly as they appear. Florence sleeps uneasily. The city is always half awake, always muttering. You turn down an alley where the walls drip with damp and the stones underfoot are slick as soap. This is where the prison squats, a heavy block of stone that pretends to be silent, but in truth never stops whispering. Inside, the cells are carved more from darkness than from rock. You know your way. Too many nights have led you here. The guards nod, not because you are trusted, but because you have paid enough times to be tolerated. That is how spies survive prison corridors, not by loyalty, but by coin and the performance of loyalty. You step into the gloom where the air tastes of rust and mildew. The informer is waiting, pressed against a wall like ivy. He is thin, his hair matted with damp, his eyes darting in the candlelight. A prisoner, yes, but one who has survived longer than most, which tells you his voice is worth more than his silence. He leans close, closer than you prefer, and breathes words against the stone so that they echo only to your ear. Names, places, debts. He offers scraps, but scraps are sometimes feasts. Mainstream fact: Renaissance prisons were not only cages, but markets. Prisoners with money or connections could rent better rooms, bribe guards for wine, even hire servants. Punishment and privilege slept in the same bed. Tonight, you see it firsthand. This informer has a straw palate and a jug of water too clean for his rank. Clearly, his tongue has bought him comfort. He tells you of a nobleman's banquet gone wrong, of a servant seen slipping powders into a goblet. He names the servant, describes the goblet, and then names 3 more men who would benefit from such a death. The details are hazy, but they are enough. Secrets in prison walls are like mold. They grow in the damp, unseen, but spread everywhere. You press him for more, and he grins with broken teeth. He wants payment, coin if you have it, favors if you don't. His life is measured not in years, but in bargains. Quirky tidbit: some informers in Florence were so prolific that chroniclers gave them nicknames, calling them parrots or sparrows, mocking the way they repeated everything they heard. Yet parroted words still earned bread, and bread still meant survival. The guard coughs down the hall, and the informer's grin falters. He leans closer, whispers of rings dipped in venom, of courtiers who fear a handshake as much as a sword. He claims one prisoner was caught with a signet that opened like a locket, a smear of paste dried inside. Historians still argue whether such accounts were exaggeration to curry favor, or whether the city truly teemed with rings ready to drizzle death. Tonight you cannot decide. What matters is that he believes it, and belief itself sharpens the blade. You give him the coin. It's safer than owing favors. He slips it into his sleeve, his hand trembling with a hunger that has nothing to do with food. He thanks you with eyes that don't mean it. You know the thanks is for himself, not for you. Joke 1. You wonder aloud if the prison should just install a ledger and let the inmates write their own gossip straight into the record. The informer almost laughs, but catches himself. Laughing too loudly here is dangerous. You leave the cell, the corridor swallowing you again. The guard eyes you, bored but calculating. You nod politely, as though you are just another visitor tending to a poor relation. Outside, the city air feels new after the prison's breath, though the damp follows you like a cloak. At the riverbank, you pause, listening. Somewhere, a shout carries, then fades. The prison never sleeps, and neither do the secrets inside it. You think of the informer pressed against the wall, his words spreading like cracks through Florence. He will live another week because he speaks. He will die because he speaks. That is the paradox of spies and prisoners alike. Joke 2. You tell yourself prison walls should be painted with careful, slippery when whispered. You keep walking, the cobblestones slick beneath your boots. Above, the stars blink faintly, as though even they are reluctant to watch. Florence holds its breath, but you exhale, steady and slow. You survived the prison tonight, not because you trust the informer, but because you trust the truth that every whisper, sooner or later, finds an ear. The ring on your finger feels cooler now, as though the damp stones have seeped into the gold. It is a reminder that survival is never clean. You carry the prison's breath with you, and you will carry it until the city finds another story to chew. Joke 3. You decide the prison is Florence's true university. Tuition paid in fear, lessons taught in whispers. The prison's whispers trail you into the night, and Florence shifts again. You climb toward a palazzo where light spills from tall arched windows, golden and deceptive. Tonight is no tavern, no market. Tonight is a masquerade, a ball where masks hide more than faces, and where secrets dance as freely as courtiers. The courtyard shimmers with torches, their flames licking at banners embroidered with lions and lilies. Guests sweep past in silks dyed with Tyrian purple, Venetian crimson, and Florentine gold. You adjust your own mask, its fox's muzzle curling into a sly smile. The signet ring on your finger gleams faintly, disguised among jewels that weigh more in suspicion than in gold. Mainstream fact: Renaissance courts adored masquerades. They were not mere entertainments, but stages where alliances could form under anonymity, where rivals could laugh together behind painted masks, and where a prince might whisper treason into a stranger's ear without consequence. Tonight, the game is played with every bow, every turn of the wrist, every sip from a goblet. You step into the hall, where the music of lutes and viols swells. The dancers form intricate patterns, weaving and unweaving like threads on a loom. It would look beautiful if it weren't also a battlefield. Each movement says something: who leads, who follows, who hesitates. You glide into the steps, your cloak flaring, your mask grinning. Joke 1. You whisper to yourself that dance is just swordplay with prettier shoes. A masked lady takes your hand. Her gloves are stitched with pearls, her laugh sweet but deliberate. She asks your name. You give her the false one, rolling it like silk from your tongue. She leans close, murmurs of a duke who fears poison so much he eats only figs peeled by his own hand. She claims she knows who sells him those figs. Her words taste like bait, and you smile because you recognize a fellow fisher. Historians still argue whether poison at court was a daily reality or a nightly fantasy, whether stories of jeweled goblets and perfumed gloves were truth or theater. The records hold both: deaths unexplained, sudden illnesses, but also countless rumors of powders that dissolve too cleanly to leave evidence. Tonight, you see how rumor itself is a weapon. The lady's eyes shine not with fact, but with the thrill of wielding fear. As you move across the floor, another dancer stumbles, his goblet tips spilling red across marble. Instantly, the room holds its breath. The music falters. Every eye flicks to the wine, to the man, to the lips he licked just moments before. He laughs too loudly, claiming clumsiness, and the music stumbles back into rhythm. But the air is tighter now. One spill can sour 100 cups. Quirky tidbit. Venetian records note that some nobles brought personal tasters even to dances. Men whose job was to sip discreetly from their master's goblet during the reel. Imagine the awkwardness of bowing to a partner while a servant hovers with wine on his breath. You chuckle softly, then school your face. Laughter here is too easily misread. You drift toward the refreshment table, where trays of sugared almonds and candied orange peel glitter under candlelight. You take a sweet, roll it between your fingers, and wonder how many poisons could be hidden in sugar. Joke 2. You decide Florence has proven the best disguise for poison is dessert. The host, masked as Apollo with a sunburst crown, raises his glass and calls for a toast. The room obeys, but cautiously. You lift your goblet, the fox on your ring winking in the light. You sip, barely, tasting honey and spice, while your eyes sweep the room. Masks tilt, hands tremble, alliances form in silence. The lady with the pearl gloves reappears, whispering again, this time of a letter hidden in a prayer book, of a servant who vanished after delivering it. You listen, nod, file it away. Her perfume lingers like a signature. Perhaps she's telling everyone a different version of the same story. Perhaps that is her role tonight, to seed rumors like breadcrumbs in the dark. The dance resumes, and you let yourself be carried in its swirl, step after step, bow after bow. But you know the truth. The real masquerade is not on the floor, but in the glances between the steps. Every mask is a shield, every goblet is a gamble. Survival here means smiling wider than anyone suspects you want to. Joke 3. You murmur under your breath that the only honest face in the hall is the musician's lute, because it can't lie when it breaks a string. The music swells, the dancers spin, the night deepens, and you, still masked, still smiling, glide forward with the knowledge that in Renaissance Florence, the deadliest duels are fought with laughter, not blades. Music fades behind you, but the tension clings. Florence feels quieter now, though that quiet is not peace but a kind of coiled listening. You walk beneath frescoed arches where saints frown from painted ceilings, as if even they suspect the wine poured tonight carried more than grapes. The trick of survival is to notice what others dismiss, and tonight you notice everything. The tremor of a hand, the faint delay in a smile, the tilt of a goblet just slightly wrong. You recall the man at the banquet who laughed too loudly after spilling wine? Perhaps it truly was clumsiness, or perhaps not. Tonight, you survived because you saw the moment before lips touched glass. That half second of hesitation saved your breath, and in Florence, half seconds are worth more than florins. Mainstream fact. Poison paranoia was a constant at Renaissance courts. Accounts from Italy and France describe nobles insisting on silver or gold cups, claiming those metals could reveal toxins. Some even hired physicians to test each course. Yet, illness and sudden death still swept courts like wind through shutters. Historians still argue whether this was poison, disease, or simply the fragility of bodies under stress. But fear itself became ritual. Every cup was a gamble, every feast a performance of bravery. Tonight you practice that ritual yourself. You linger in the courtyard, your goblet still in hand, and let the torchlight dance on the surface of the wine. A servant passes with a tray of candied fennel, and you take one absently, chewing bitterness masked with sugar. The flavors war on your tongue, but you welcome the distraction. Joke 1. You decide Florence invented candy just so fear could taste sweet. In the corner of your eye, a young man raises his glass too eagerly, gulping without pause. His peers exchange looks, admiration tinged with pity. He does not yet know the art of survival. He has not learned that sometimes the only way to live through a toast is to pretend to drink, to let wine wet the lips, but never the throat. You, by contrast, lower your goblet slowly, your smile thin, your eyes busy. The wrong tilt of a goblet can mean more than clumsiness. It can be a signal. This glass is safe, this one is not. It can be a hesitation that betrays knowledge, or an eagerness that betrays ignorance. You replay each gesture at the banquet like lines in a play. Who drank quickly, who delayed, who passed their cup untouched to a servant. Each is a line in a script where the stakes are survival. Quirky tidbit. In some courts, hosts use elaborate goblets with mechanical tricks, double chambers, false bottoms, or siphons hidden in the stem. Guests marveled at the craftsmanship, but the hidden engineering also allowed a switch of liquid mid-toast. Imagine bowing to your host while your wine quietly vanished into the stem, replaced by water or something worse. You glance at your plain goblet now and almost envy its honesty. The night cools further. A breeze carries the faint scent of the river and the musk of nearby stables. You step aside into a cloister garden where the air feels less watched. There, beneath cypress shadows, you breathe deeply. The ring on your hand feels heavier, its secret paste shifting as though alive. You wonder how many goblets it might touch before someone notices the wrong tilt of your wrist. Historians still argue whether famous poisonings, the sudden deaths of dukes, the rumors about queens, were fact or fiction spun by enemies. Some claim most noble deaths were simple fevers, transformed into tales of poison because people preferred intrigue to nature. But you live in Florence, where intrigue is nature. Here, suspicion is the city's bloodstream, and poison is its pulse. Joke 2. You imagine a Florentine proverb, trust wine, distrust the cup. You hear footsteps and draw back into shadow. Two courtiers stroll past, their masks lifted now that the dance is done. One whispers, "Did you see his handshake?" He knew. The other laughs, but softly, as if laughter itself might be overheard. You wait until they pass, then step out, your breath steady. Tonight you have survived not because your goblet was safe, but because you saw the moment when it might not have been. The survival is not in drinking, it is in noticing. You walk on, through arcades and alleys, replaying every tilt, every tremor, every spill. Florence whispers still, and you listen, because listening is the only antidote you can trust. Joke 3. You decide to raise a silent toast to yourself, to survival, the finest vintage of all. You follow the scent of hot vinegar and wet stone to a door with a knocker shaped like a salamander, its bronze back polished by centuries of caution. The salamander, symbol of fire that doesn't burn, exactly the kind of mascot an alchemist would choose. You tap twice, then once, and the door lifts its own sigh. Inside, the laboratory glows the color of laid honey. Coals breathe in a brazier, retorts curve like puzzled swans, and glass bulbs nest in straw as if they might hatch. Somewhere a drip counts seconds, slower than your pulse, faster than certainty. He appears from the steam, the alchemist, hair tied back with string, eyes shining the way only a man's eyes shine when he believes he's about to convince you of something impossible. He lifts a thin vial between two fingers. The liquid inside is clear as gossip and just as dangerous. "A single drop," he says, "to heal." He pauses, or to harm. Of course he pauses there. Salesmanship is a universal language. He lets you smell it. Spirit of wine rides high, and something bitter that makes your mouth forget it belongs to a body. He gestures to a table where two bowls sit, one of water, one of milk. Into the first, he drips a single pearl of liquid. The surface shivers and stills. Into the second, he lets fall another drop, and the milk clots like a frown. The body, he explains, is milk more often than water. You nod because the metaphor is good and the showmanship is better. Mainstream fact, men like this are the bridge between old alchemy and new chemistry. Paracelsus, yes, the wandering firebrand who thundered in Latin and German, insisted that only the dose makes a thing, not a poison. He wrote of dose the way priests write of grace. You repeat his principle in your head while the alchemist's vials catch candlelight. A single drop can cure. A single drop can kill. The distance between those two promises is the width of a human hand that either shakes or doesn't. On a shelf, a jar of oil the color of straw leans beside a shard of purple glass. Vitriol, he says of the first, sweet when it wishes to be, cruel when it does not. Of the second, Regia's kiss, meaning Aqua Regia's power to bite gold. He speaks of niter and sal ammoniac with the tender patience of a gardener. His mortar smells of angelica, bitter almond, and the stubborn shadow of real gar. You think of your fox signet and the drizzle not storm philosophy waiting beneath its bezel. Dose, you remind yourself, always dose. He wants to show you more. He drags a small chest from beneath the bench, opens it like a priest opening a reliquary. Inside lie charms, antelope horn spoons, misnamed unicorn, a ring with a seed pearl hinge, a wafer of bezoar wrapped in silk. Protection, he murmurs, for those who fear their friends. You've never heard a more accurate definition of Florence. Quirky tidbit. He swears by dew gathered at dawn from clean linen stretched in a herb garden. Only the first hour, he insists, for purity. He uses it to dissolve salts without offending them, as if salts were nobles at dinner. You almost smile. Joke 1. You decide Florence is the only city where even water keeps visiting hours. He heats a little dish over coals. Observe, he says, sliding a sliver of dried poppy petal into the clear drip. It darkens, then vanishes. A carrier, he explains, for comfort or for rest. He doesn't say for death. He doesn't need to. The laboratory says it for him, the way heat writes its slow sermons up the glass, the way vapors find corners, the way every instrument is both cradle and gallows. You ask mildly whether a single drop prefers to live in rings. His eyes flick to your hand and back, polite as a butler. Rings, pomanders, the lip of a locket, he says, or the dot on a seal no one thinks to taste. He speaks the last with a craftsman's pride that makes your tongue go dry. Historians still argue whether such refinements were everyday tools or rare curiosities later inflated by gossip. The alchemist doesn't argue, he sells. And survival, here, is learning to buy the part of a promise that pays interest. He brings out a different vial, amber this time, viscous as slow thought. Elixir, he announces, a cordial for hearts that must beat longer than their enemies expect. He offers you a drop on a sliver of quince. It tastes like candied medicine, which is to say like hope in a sugar coat. Your fingertips tingle, or perhaps you only want them to. With elixirs, suggestion does half the lifting. Joke 2. You silently rate the flavor fear forward. Honey finish. He speaks of mercury tamed, of antimony purified, of salts coaxed into marriages with spirits until new bodies are born. He insists the world is quicklime and can be slaked to gentleness if you know the name of its thirst. It's beautiful nonsense with a truth threaded through. Heating, cooling, dissolving, precipitating. The work does change things. He shows you a powder that was once a leaf that was once steam that once pretended to be soul. Still, the promise of an elixir that chooses its mercy by the drop is a promise Florence would love too much. You ask if anyone has tested it on something less poetic than milk. He says nothing for a moment, then points to a dish where ants lie like punctuation at the end of a sentence. They do not argue, he says softly. Men always argue. Historians still argue whether experiment in such rooms was careful method or theater in search of patrons. You decide it can be both, and that each improves the other's costume. He names his price. It is not modest. You let the number rest on the table like a guest you didn't invite. Outside, a bell marks the quarter hour, and the salamander knocker remembers bonfires. You could afford this vial, and a rival might not. Or you could leave empty-handed and sleep with the knowledge that you declined a miracle that wasn't. You think of the apothecary's theriac, the drizzle not storm paste, the bezoar that pretends to be a stone and occasionally succeeds. You think of the mistress's orange flower letter and the prison informer's broken smile. You think finally of dose. You buy half. He laughs, pleased, not insulted, and decants into a smaller glass with a neck thin as patience. He seals it with a disc of wax impressed by a stamp shaped like the sun. Remember, he says, what heals at dawn may harm at dusk. The body changes with the light. You do not believe that. You believe in steadier things, caution, timing, habit. But you accept the poetry because it carries the memory better. Joke 3. You tell him if the elixir does both, he should charge double and call it efficient. He grins and pockets your coin as if you have tipped him for the compliment. On your way out, he stops you with a fingertip lifted, the way a teacher arrests a promising error. He tells you softly that antidotes work best when the story around them is believable. If people think they are saved, they buy the time for saving. The line lands with the weight of learned experience. You tuck it beside Paracelsus's dose and the drizzle rule. Flourish, fear, and fraction, the three strands of Renaissance survival. Back in the alley, you let the door close and the salamander resumes its bronze nap. The vial feels warm in your pocket, though you know it is only your own blood being dramatic. Florence hears your step and does not look up. You choose your path the way you always do, not straight, not slow, not memorable. The night carries you like a retort carries vapor, gently upward, then down its cool curve toward whatever waits to condense. You choose a street that smells of tallow and old vellum, and soon the lantern light discovers what you're looking for. A stall of second-hand books set under an archway, each spine leaning into its neighbor like monks at Compline. The vendor nods without rising from his stool. He has seen your face before, or at least your masks. He gestures toward a velvet-lined tray of small volumes, breviaries, hours, psalters, books so soft with use that the pages curve as if they learned to breathe. In Florence, prayer never travels alone. It walks arm in arm with politics, and sometimes with powder. You pick up a book of hours, its clasps shaped like lilies, the gilded edges catching fire in the lantern's swing. The parchment murmurs under your thumb. Miniatures bloom in the margins, saints in gowns of impossibly blue lapis, vines twisted with gold leaf, angels whose wings look jealous of the peacocks. Mainstream fact, books of hours were the best sellers of late medieval and Renaissance Europe. Private prayer manuals customized for the lady, more common in wealthy households than mirrors. They went everywhere, to bedsides, to chapels, to journeys across the Apennines, and, as rumor insists, to meetings where pages hid more than prayers. You lower your head as though in reverence and test the thing you came to test. The ring's hinge rests against the book's foredge. That gleaming wall of gilded page ends. You do not open it, you merely brush, drizzle not storm, then turn the volume so the gold drinks the lantern light, and your touch disappears under warmth and sheen. Gilded edges hide smears better than glass. That is a sentence you wish you didn't know. You breathe slowly, then do nothing further. Safety first, then stories. The vendor offers you a different volume, smaller, pocketable, with a leather flap. He winks. For travel, he says. You open it and your fingers feel the faintest thickness under the paste down, the inside cover where binder's paper hides the boards. You run a nail along the joint and hear a hollow note. Quirky tidbit. Binders sometimes left hollows and spines to let books flex. Clever hands have used those spaces to slip letters, lucky charms, even pressed petals said to be from relic flowers. In this city, hollow is another word for opportunity. You turn pages over Pounce dusted surface, the grit of gum sandarak singing very softly beneath your skin. Pounce, ink's patient cousin, dries and hardens the parchment. It also offers a pantry for anyone with darker recipes. You imagine a careful hand adulterating Pounce with something less devotional, then tapping it by habit across a page that a particular reader will kiss or touch twice a day. Historians still argue whether poison ever truly rode to work on the backs of pious powders, or whether that's merely how enemies explain sudden grief. You don't need the verdict, you need the possibility. An illuminated calendar page stops you. Blue and gold squares for the saints' days, a harvest scene of men cutting wheat. In the margin, you find a hair-thin slit, almost lost in the vines. A letterlock's cousin, you think. A place where a note could tuck under paint and gilding, safe from casual thumbs. You slide a piece of straw in and feel it catch. The book has already been a messenger. It might be again. You look up to find the vendor watching you watch the book. He has the patient expression of a man who sells both pages and the histories that stain them. You ask about the clasp. Does it hold well? He nods, demonstrates, then lowers his voice to confide that noble women prefer double clasps, so nothing slips out when kneeling. You nod back as if sharing a household complaint about unruly devotions. Joke 1. You murmur that even prayers need a belt sometimes. Across the tray lies a rosary ring, an anello da orazione, a small circle of metal pricked with 10 bumps. 1 decade of prayers in a palm, discreet and portable. You roll it against your thumb, thinking of your fox signet's hidden hinge. Devotion and discretion fit the same finger. Somewhere in a chapel, someone could count Hail Marys, while also deciding the fate of a ledger, a treaty, a life. Florence specializes in holy multitasking. You pay for the book and carry it to a quiet church, where the nave gathers shadows the way a fountain gathers coins. A friar sweeps near the door and pretends not to see you. You sit where candle wax has made the stone shiny and open the volume to Compline, the night office. The words calm the page like a tide slackening. In manus tuas, Domine. Into your hands, O Lord. The phrase makes you glance at your own hands, one holding prayer, one wearing a ring that thinks about rain. It's good to be reminded that not every liquid in Florence conspires. On the flyleaf, a neat Italian hand has written a household motto and a date. You trace the date with a fingertip and smell, faintly, the ghost of lavender. Some owners stored books with herb sachets, both to bless the nose and to discourage insects. You remember the mistress's orange blossom and the way perfume made an alibi. Scent turns pages into people. People are easier to forgive than pages. You test the margins again. Nothing hides there now, but they could. You picture scraping pigment with a penknife, every scribe owned one, and sprinkling a pinch of altered Pounce along the lower corner, where fingertips always land to turn a page. You picture, then reject, because imagining danger is not the same as deserving it. The ring rests, the drizzle sleeping. You are not here to invent crimes, only to read the ones paper might be rehearsing. Historians still argue whether notorious families, whisper their names, then swallow them, ever use prayer books as routes for harm. A handful of inquisitorial records speak of enchanted pages, most of them condemning superstition rather than chemistry. Other tales insist that gilded edges once burned a mouth that kissed them. You set such stories on the shelf beside unicorn spoons and antidote stones. Half theater, half warning label. The shelf, you have learned, is sturdier than it looks. You close the book and press the clasps. The click is small, satisfied, like a cat deciding you may live another day. The friar glances over, then returns to his sweeping. You ask, lightly, whether the church ever sells old books to fund roof repairs. He smiles a thin yes. People prefer saints with dry heads, he says. You agree. Wet saints give poor sermons. Joke 2. You suggest the parish sell umbrellas with halos printed on them. He nearly smiles again, which feels like a benediction. On your way out, you dip fingers in the stoop and touch cool across your brow. The water smells faintly of stone and iron. No roses here, no orange blossom. You whisper a line you were taught as a child and let it settle your shoulders. The ring feels suddenly heavy, and then, as your breath evens, ordinary again. Ordinary is the best disguise you own. Outside, the vendor is closing his stall. You hand him a coin more than you owe, and ask that he keep an eye out for volumes with double boards, bindings so thick they could hide a folded note. He nods. Travelers bring strange books into, he says, and strangers bring stranger prayers. You tell him you prefer familiar prayers and unfamiliar bindings. He laughs. The evening takes that laugh and thins it to gold. Joke 3. As you tuck the Book of Hours beneath your cloak, you decide that if anyone questions you tonight, you will claim the only dangerous powder in your possession is sandarak, and that you are armed at worst with tidy margins. You turn a corner and the city narrows to your footsteps. Gilded edges glimmer inside your cloak. The fox on your ring sleeps. The pages in your hand breathe. Faith, fear, and fiber. Florence binds them all, presses them, clasps them, and hopes the reader will be gentle. You walk softer, as if not to wake the saints. The bells of San Lorenzo strike midnight, their tones muffled through narrow streets. You follow the sound toward a palazzo where a feast has not yet ended, though the courses have long since shifted from food to politics. The gates open for you with reluctant hinges, and you step into the hall's bright heat, the air thick with roasted meats, citrus peels, and candle smoke. Survival here is measured in forkfuls, in glances across the table, in whether or not you lift your cup when the host lifts his. The noble who presides tonight is no Medici, but his suspicions are borrowed from the same wardrobe. His guests are merchants, not dukes, but merchants in Florence wield fortunes large enough to dress like princes and enemies sharp enough to kill like them. You take your seat among them, noting the details. One man's knuckles too white on his goblet. A woman's gaze that lingers just long enough to suggest she already knows your false name. Mainstream fact. Renaissance banquets were notorious for their length. Dozens of courses, music between servings, even pageants staged mid-meal. Forks are still novelties. Fingers and knives do most of the work. Servants bustle constantly, carrying trenchers in and scraps out. All this bustle means opportunity. A hand can pass a note as easily as a platter, a powder as easily as a garnish. Tonight, every servant is both invisible and terrifying. You take bread, tear it slowly. You remember the courier's loaf from earlier, the parchment hidden in the crust. Bread feeds, bread conceals, bread kills. Florence's trinity. You chew, swallow, breathe. The noble smiles at you, but his eyes linger on your goblet. That's when you notice. Yours has been refilled without your seeing. Your throat tightens. Did you lift it? Did you sip? You touch the rim with your lips just enough to wet them and set it down again. If there's danger, you've not yet swallowed it. The woman across from you watches, her own goblet untouched. She is waiting, but for what? Historians still argue whether most sudden deaths at feasts were due to poison or poor hygiene. The kitchens of Florence, for all their wealth, had rats as well as spices, stagnant water as well as wine. A stew left cooling too long could fell a guest as quickly as arsenic. But suspicion prefers glamour to filth. It is more satisfying to whisper he was poisoned than he had indigestion. Tonight you agree. Indigestion doesn't stare at you across the table with a smile. A servant offers a platter of candied quince, fruit glazed to brilliance. You take a piece, turn it between your fingers. Quirky tidbit. Quince was considered both a delicacy and a charm against poison, its tartness believed to strengthen the stomach. Some nobles carried a slice in pockets, nibbling like squirrels whenever fear struck. You bite, chew slowly, then pretend not to notice the noble still watching you. Joke 1. You murmur that quince tastes best when it isn't doubling as a shield. The hall fills with music, shawms, and lutes weaving a tune that pretends to be cheerful. The noble raises his goblet for a toast. Everyone copies him. You lift yours, steady, though your hand wants to tremble. You sip just enough, and the wine tastes like oak and pepper and fear. You smile because survival here is smiling. Then you see it. A guest 2 seats down, his goblet tipped at an angle just slightly wrong. He coughs once, clears his throat, drinks again. His neighbor pats his shoulder too quickly, the gesture rehearsed. You know the signs, either a bad swallow or a test that didn't go well. He lasts the rest of the toast, but his color is wrong. The noble doesn't notice or pretends not to. The woman across from you finally sips her wine, but only after you've drunk. Her eyes flicker approval or calculation. Perhaps she was waiting to see if you would drop first. The hall laughs around you, but you hear only the faint sound of your ring against the goblet stem, the fox winking at you with every tilt. Historians still debate whether poison rings were ever deployed in such settings, or whether the idea is a later romance. Surviving rings exist, but their stories are harder to prove than their hinges. Still, you feel the drizzle not storm pace beneath your own signet, and you know such stories are not fiction tonight. Dessert arrives, candied almonds, gilded with gold leaf. Guests pop them into mouths with the nonchalance of people who have decided to trust luck. You take one, crack the sugar, feel the bitterness beneath. Perhaps it's just burnt syrup, perhaps not. Joke 2. You decide almonds taste the same whether they save or betray you. The noble begins a tale of hunting in the hills, his voice booming across the hall. Laughter punctuates his story, but eyes flick constantly toward plates and goblets. This is the true entertainment, watching who eats, who hesitates, who pretends. You watch too, because survival is a spectator sport here. When the feast ends, guests leave with practiced courtesy, each smiling as though the night had been nothing but pleasure. You bow, you offer thanks, you step into the cooler air of the courtyard with relief that feels almost sinful. Joke 3. You tell yourself Florence should rename its banquets endurance trials with snacks. You survived, but the night teaches again. In Florence, every meal is both nourishment and test. And tonight you passed, though not by much. The ring at your finger is heavier. The quince sits uneasily in your stomach, and you walk into the night knowing tomorrow's feast may not be so forgiving. You step out of the palazzo's gates, and the night air cools your lungs, rinsing away the heat of wine and candle smoke. Florence hums faintly in the distance, but you turn your steps toward quieter waters. Tonight you need the canals, not the wide Arno, but the narrow back veins of the city, where gondolas drift in shadows and secrets row as passengers. The canal smells of damp stone, tar, and something faintly metallic. A boatman waits, hat pulled low, his oar resting lightly in the water. You nod, and without a word, he helps you step aboard. The gondola rocks, then steadies. You sit, the water black beneath you, lantern light rippling like molten bronze. The city changes from this view, Palazzi tilt like weary giants, bridges arch like drawn bows, and voices echo differently across the surface. Mainstream fact: Venice may have perfected canal life, but Florence too used its waterways as arteries of trade and secrecy. Grain, cloth, and timber moved silently at night, avoiding city tolls. Couriers floated as easily as barrels of wine. The water carried everything, except perhaps innocence. The gondola glides forward. You listen to the oar's steady dip, the splash, the small gasp as it lifts. The sound is soothing, hypnotic, but the shadows above the banks remind you this ride is not leisure. Deals are whispered here, faster than any sermon and cheaper than any guild. If taverns spread rumors like sparks, canals carry them like smoke. The boatman steers beneath a bridge, the arch low enough that you duck. As you rise again, you glimpse two figures leaning over the parapet. One passes a bundle down, the other receives it with a nod. Paper, powder, a letter. The oar keeps moving, and so do you. Florence's water does not pause for your curiosity. Historians still argue whether gondoliers acted as informants or mere ferrymen. Some records suggest whole families of boatsmen carried coded messages, guiding conspiracies as surely as they guided their crafts. Others insist most were just trying to feed children and patch leaky hulls. Tonight, your boatman's silence leans toward the first theory. You test the weight of your ring against the wooden seat. Its fox crest catches a glimmer of lantern glow, but the hinge stays shut. This isn't the place to drizzle. The water takes anything you drop and delivers it elsewhere. Poison here would only dilute, drift, become another secret lost in currents. A gondola passes in the opposite direction, its prow raised like a black beak. For a moment the lanterns align, and you see a veiled woman reclining inside, flanked by two men with hands too steady to be friends. You look away before they notice, but not before filing away the detail. Survival is not always about acting. Sometimes it's about archiving. Quirky tidbit: some gondolas were fitted with felza, small cabins of wood and cloth that hid passengers from view. The Venetians claimed they were for privacy. Florence joked they were for plotting. You glance at your open gondola and smile faintly. No felze tonight. Just you, the boatman, in the city's listening water. Joke 1. You mutter that at least the mosquitoes here don't charge extra for secrecy. The boatman pauses near a set of stone steps where another man waits. A quick exchange of parcels. Your saffron pouch for a folded sheet sealed in wax. You do not ask what was traded, you only tuck the paper deep into your cloak. The water is the courier, the gondola only its quill. As you drift onward, the city fades to murmurs. The stars show themselves now, mirrored in water that feels both eternal and temporary. You think of all the words ferried here, threats, promises, bargains, and how many of them sank before reaching their shores. Florence's canals are libraries with no shelves, archives written in ripples. Historians still debate whether the great conspiracies, the pezzi, the whispers against the Medici, relied on boats as much as taverns and courtyards. Some evidence suggests letters were dropped into weighted bottles, fished out downstream. Others doubt it, pointing out that rivers betray secrets by floating them back. You prefer the first story. It makes the water seem like an accomplice. The gondola slows near a torch set into stone. The boatman raises his chin. The ride is done. You step out, coin exchanged, silence intact. The water closes behind you, black and unreadable. You walk away, your footsteps loud now after so much soft splashing. Joke 2. You decide gondolas are like confessionals. You climb in guilty and climb out more guilty, but quieter. As you make your way through the alleys, you realize how calm you feel. Perhaps it's the rhythm of the oar still echoing in your body, or perhaps it's the way the city's veins have reminded you. Secrets do not vanish, they only travel. You will carry tonight's parcel until the next hand takes it, and then the current will carry you too. The fox on your ring catches one last flicker of torchlight before the alley swallows it. You tug your cloak tighter, listening. The canals may have released you, but Florence still holds you. Joke 3. You promise yourself if you survive this week, you'll invent a gondola that rows itself. After all, secrets seem eager enough to travel on their own. You turn away from the canal stairs and climb the servants' lane, a narrower, steeper twin to the grand front approach, hidden behind kitchen walls and laundry lines. The stones hear no different footsteps, lighter, quicker, the hush of people who keep houses breathing while their masters sleep. You take this route because the front door is for theater, the back is for surviving the intermission. Your lodging sits in a warren of courtyards, a palazzo subdivided so thoroughly that every echo belongs to someone else. The door you use opens into the cucina, where embers sleep in the hearth like red-eyed cats. Lucia, the maid, looks up from a bucket of linens and gives you the look of a person who has asked a question 3 times with her eyebrows. You nod once, a signal you invented together, later private. She returns to her work, wringing cloth with the efficiency of a general. Pietro, your valet, if a man who keeps your cloak brushed and your lies organized is a valet, appears with a brass scaldino, a small hand warmer filled with charcoal and patience. He offers it without comment. You take it grateful and warm your fingers before you touch anything you might later need to deny. Joke 1. You murmur that civilization is a box of coals that fits in a pocket. Pietro permits himself a breath that might be a laugh. Mainstream fact. Great and middling Renaissance households ran on servants. Stewards, majordomi, housekeepers, massari, valets, laundresses, cooks, footmen, pages, each with a wage, a livery and house colors, and most tellingly, a key. Keys made the sound of authority in these halls. A steward's chatelaine could jingle like a small carillon. Pietro's ring of keys is modest, but the one you trust most is not metal. It's the one that opens his face from careful to candid when the door shuts. You let him help you off with your cloak and then raise your hand. The fox on your signet flashes, his gaze flicks to it and away. He knows not to touch unless asked. You ask. Pietro takes the ring in the corner of a cloth, carries it to the lamp, and examines the bezel with the concentration of a goldsmith and the dread of a man deactivating a trap. He breathes on the hinge. It fogs. Good. The drizzle stays sleeping. He wipes the band, then returns it to you on his palm as if offering war or peace. Lucia arrives with a pitcher and 2 cups. You notice she places your cup slightly to the left. Your signal for the kitchen door was used by someone you didn't invite. She does this while complaining about laundry soap, about a neighbor's goose that mistakes aprons for enemies, about the price of lye rising with the moon. Quirky tidbit. Some households actually kept geese as night alarms. Unlike dogs, geese consider everyone suspicious and announce it with trumpets. You have no geese, only Lucia, who's cheaper and more accurate. You ask Pietro for the ledger, not the account book for rent and candles, the other ledger, the one that records servants' gossip translated into your language of risk. He reads softly. The steward of a rival household ordered extra rosemary for roast meat, he claimed. A scullion. There has a burn on his wrist shaped like a goblet's lip. A stable boy traded a handful of saffron for a ribbon that smelled of orange blossom. You hear the notes resolve into a chord. Kitchen, cup, perfume. Dangers you already met now humming under another roof. Historians still argue whether domestic service in Renaissance Italy carved obedience deep enough to ensure loyalty, or whether proximity to power created the perfect market for betrayal. Wage books show regular pay, Court records show servants selling secrets when the price rose higher. You feel the debate in your own bones tonight. You have to trust someone, and the people nearest you could sell you a second time for a first price. You test that trust gently. From your cloak, you draw 2 packets, identical to the eye, one filled with harmless powdered pumice, the other with something that should never meet a lip. You place both on the table and ask Lucia casually to take them to the storeroom, top shelf, far right, the place labeled soap. She moves to obey, then stops, lifts the packets to her nose, and smiles without humor. "Soap that smells like almonds?" she says, and sets the dangerous one down beside your elbow with more respect than you've earned. "You keep your soap," she adds, and vanishes toward the stairs. You let out a breath you did not admit to holding. Pietro waits until her footfalls fade, then shrugs with his eyebrows. "Told you so." You nod. "Told me so." He refills your cup from the pitcher of water he drew himself, with the key he hides in his boot, from the cistern he keeps locked because he trusts taps the way you trust theater applause. You drink. It tastes like stone in the absence of surprises. Joke 2. You say you'd like to frame that flavor and hang it over your bed. On the table, you lay out the night's archive. The letter traded on the canal, the pouch of saffron, the vial, the alchemist sealed with a sun. Pietro opens a drawer and produces the little wooden board with 2 shallow runnels, your homemade letterpress. He places the letter between boards and weights it with a pebble. Any tampering will crease differently. He stores the saffron in a jar already labeled with a fake spice and a real date. The vial he locks in a chest that also holds scissors, a penknife, and the kind of string that solves problems whose names you don't know yet. "Twine," he says, deadpan, universal remedy. You grin despite yourself. Lucia returns with a bedwarmer, a brass pan on a long handle, full of new coals. She slips it between the sheets in your small chamber so your bed will not ambush you with cold. As the pan slides, you catch a whiff of lavender. She's tucked in a sprig. Lavender again, always writing its quiet footnote across your nights. The mistress's letter wore it, the prayer book remembered it, and now your bed borrows some to make sleep less foreign. You talk contingencies with Pietro while Lucia's pan murmurs in linen. If a message fails to arrive, you leave through the roof stairs. If a visitor insists on the front door, he opens the back window into the alley and accidentally drops a pan. Noise is a better guard than honor. If you do not wake at dawn, he doses you with vinegar and theriac and shouts a prayer you both don't believe in but find comforting to hear aloud. Survival is a choreography, a list of steps you hope never to dance. He hesitates, then places another item on the table. A folded scrap he found tucked under your door. Inside is a single line. The river is patient. No signature, no seal. The handwriting could be anybody's who learned to write slowly enough to seem more educated than they are. You and Pietro read it twice. The river, yes, patient and full of secrets. A warning? A taunt? Historians still argue whether such anonymous notes were the work of enemies or allies trying to stay alive. You decide it doesn't matter. Both require you to keep moving. Before you sleep, you ask Pietro the question that embarrasses you. Would you tell me if someone offered to buy me? He blinks, then answers with a narrow smile. I would tell you how much they offered, he says, so we could ask for more. You laugh despite the hour. Joke 3, you declare that loyalty, like saffron, is expensive and stains everything it touches. He bows out. Lucia's footsteps cross above like the softest rain. You sit alone a moment with the ring cool on your finger, the ledger closed, the coals settling. Servants keep you alive. Servants could end you. You will see them at dawn with brooms and bread, with keys and cups. You think of the apothecary's ledger, of the boy courier with his hollow loaf, of the masked lady baiting rumors at the dance. All of them serve someone. All of them are served by fear. In your chamber, the sheets are warm, the window is cracked to let in a sliver of honest night air, and the bed smells faintly of lavender and iron. You place the signet on the table within reach, the antidote nearer still. Your last thought before the room loosens is simple. You survive because Pietro locks, because Lucia notices, because you trust them both, and because you are ready for the day when you cannot. The city sleeps somewhere beyond the shutters, pretending as always to be harmless. You pretend as always to believe it. Dawn never reaches you gently. It pushes through shutters with fingers of gray, insisting you rise before the city wakes. Pietro is already stirring in the outer chamber, his cough discreet, his footsteps careful. He leaves a basin of cold water by your bed, and you splash your face until a night's ghosts run off with the rivulets. The fox on your signet gleams in the early light, innocent as a morning prayer, though both of you know better. Today, you must cross the Alps. Not because you want to, but because secrets travel farther than Florence, and someone has decided your hands are safest for carrying them. The vials, the letters, the promises, small weights that tilt entire cities, are stitched into your cloak lining and wrapped in harmless saffron. Joke 1. You tell yourself you are only a spice merchant with an unusually suspicious shopping list. The streets are still yawning when you leave. Bakers stoke their ovens, and the smell of yeast and smoke rises like the first hymn of the day. You walk briskly toward the northern gate where a caravan waits. Mules stamp their hooves against frost. Drivers mutter into their scarves, and guards peer at papers with eyes too tired for suspicion. Mainstream fact: Florence's merchants routinely pushed across Alpine passes, linking the city to German markets, French fairs, and Swiss valleys. Goods moved with them, but so did letters, rumors, and the occasional vial that could not afford daylight. You fall in with the caravan, hood low, cloak close. The road beyond the city bends upward quickly, cobbles giving way to mud, mud giving way to snow. The Alps loom like a sermon you cannot avoid, harsh, endless, unavoidable. By mid-morning, the cold has set its teeth into your bones. The vial at your side feels like a shard of ice. The drizzle knot storm paste inside the ring stiffens with the chill. You flex your fingers, making sure the hinge still listens. Historians still argue whether Alpine passes were as treacherous in the Renaissance as chroniclers claimed. Avalanche-prone, bandit-haunted, wolf-thick, or whether writers embellished the hardships to magnify their patrons' bravery. You have no need for debate. Your boots slip, your breath burns, your ears ache. The danger feels plenty real. By noon, snow swallows the road, mules huff clouds, and your cloak grows heavy with frost. One driver sings under his breath, some rustic ballad about love that tastes like wine and ends like vinegar. You smile faintly. Joke 2. You imagine Florence itself as a lover who tastes like wine, costs like saffron, and ends like vinegar. You climb higher, where the wind claws at your face. The vial in your cloak bumps against your ribs with each step, like a heartbeat reminding you that secrets travel poorly in bad weather. Once, the caravan halts while a scout checks the path ahead. Everyone huddles close, stamping feet, sharing warmth through proximity and muttered curses. You say nothing. Spies survive by conserving words the way mountaineers conserve breath. Quirky tidbit, guides, sometimes buried wine bottles in snow along the pass, markers for future trips and emergency rations alike. Travelers swore the taste was better after months in the mountain cold. You scan the white drifts and imagine bottles sleeping under them, waiting to be discovered by luck or hunger. Perhaps one even carries a letter, corked and forgotten. You almost laugh at the thought. When the caravan resumes, the road narrows into switchbacks. A slip here would mean tumbling into valleys sharp as knives. You keep close to the cliff, the ring pressed against your skin for balance as if its tiny hinge could anchor you to stone. The fox crest is hidden in your glove, but you feel its sly smile anyway. Survival is not always grand. Sometimes it is the stubbornness of each careful step. At a pass marked by a shrine to Saint Bernard, patron of travelers, you pause with the others. A small wooden box sits on the shrine ledge, filled with notes scribbled by passing pilgrims. Requests for protection, thanks for safe passage, names left behind like breadcrumbs. You touch the edge of the box but leave no paper. Your prayer is already written in your pocket, sealed with wax, folded tight. The descent is harder than the climb. Snow turns to slush, slush to mud, mud to stone slick with meltwater. Boots slide, curses echo, but the caravan presses on. Evening descends like a second mountain, darker and heavier than the first. At last, lanterns ahead signal the inn, a cluster of wood and stone crouched in the valley, smoke curling bravely against the cold sky. Inside, heat and noise strike you at once. A fire leaps in the hearth, tables groan under bowls of stew, and the air is thick with damp wool. You find a corner, remove your cloak, and let the frost steam away. The ring warms again, the hinge loosening, the drizzle waking. You sip hot broth, its flavor blunt but honest. For a moment, you almost believe you are simply a traveler among others. Historians still argue whether spies traveled in caravans openly or disguised as pilgrims. Tonight, you blur the line. You are both. A man with a burden of faith and of secrets, crossing mountains because Florence demands it. Joke 3. You raise your spoon and declare silently that stew is the only antidote strong enough to counter snow. As sleep takes you by the inn fire, you realize survival is not always glamorous. Sometimes it is just warmth, food, and the knowledge that the vial did not break, the ring did not spill, and the mountain did not swallow you. The Alps have tested you, and for now you remain. The fire at the Alpine Inn burns low when you wake, but already the road calls you further north. The caravan disperses. Some traders veer toward Lyon, others toward Basel, but your path bends toward Rome's shadow in miniature. The papal court at Avignon's echo, still clinging to its Italian heart. You must reach those who whisper in cassocks and argue in Latin, where rings are not only for wax and weddings, but for survival. The papal entourage has its own air, perfumed with incense and bureaucracy. Cardinals stride in scarlet like embers walking upright. Clerks hurry with arms full of parchment, their faces pale as candle wax. You slip into this world with your cloak cleaned, your ring polished, your false name rehearsed. Here, everyone is a servant of God, yet everyone also serves themselves. The trick is pretending the order is reversed. It's mainstream fact. Renaissance Rome and its satellite courts were notorious for intrigue. Cardinals wielded wealth as kings did. Conclaves turned into small wars fought with bribes and promises. Gifts flowed, chalices, paintings, and most famously, rings. The papal ring itself, the fisherman's ring, sealed bulls and decrees. But beneath the weight of rubies and emeralds, rumors swirled that some rings carried other meanings: poison, antidote, temptation. You are ushered into an antechamber where the air tastes of beeswax and ink. A cardinal sits by the hearth, his hands heavy with jewelry. As he gestures, the gold flashes like signals, each gem a tiny semaphore. His smile is wide, but his eyes are ledger sharp. He speaks of Florence, its markets, its wool, its restless factions. You answer politely, letting your merchant mask carry the load. Then he lifts a hand to show you a ring, a sapphire set in gold, but with a bezel too thick for fashion. He taps it against his goblet, once, twice. You watch, careful not to stare. Is it a signet, a reliquary, or something with a hinge like yours? He does not open it, but the possibility hovers in the room like smoke. Historians still argue whether clerics truly wore poison rings or whether such tales were slander whispered by enemies. Tonight, you sit close enough to believe. The cardinal offers wine. You accept because refusing would be its own confession. You raise the goblet, sip lightly. The flavor is rich, spiced, sweet with malmsey. You pretend to enjoy it more than you fear it. Joke 1. You tell yourself even heaven must serve wine with a suspicious aftertaste. Clerks shuffle past with parchment sealed in wax, each stamped with rings. The cardinal notices your fox signet and nods appreciatively. A man should trust what he seals, he says, the line carrying 2 meanings. You nod back, murmuring something about fidelity. Though both of you know fidelity is the least fashionable virtue in this court, quirky tidbit, some papal physicians swore by bezoars, presenting them in gilded mounts as talismans against poison. Visitors could be served drinks poured over such stones, the liquid catching superstition as it flowed. One chronicler swears the Pope himself tested his cup this way, though whether the stone saved him or simply looked impressive is unclear. You imagine the stone clinking in a chalice, part relic, part placebo. The cardinal leans close. His words drop like pearls and daggers together. He mentions a Florentine banker, an overdue tithe, a rival who may not live to see the jubilee. He does not say poison. He does not need to. Instead, he lets his thick bezeled ring tap the goblet again, then smiles. You smile too, because that is the only reply that keeps you breathing. Later, in the cloister, incense thickens the air. Monks chant softly, their voices rising like walls of sound. You walk among them, your hand brushing your cloak, where the alchemist's vial sleeps. You wonder if anyone here carries vials under their cassocks, if the bells they wear hide compartments, if their rosaries hold more than prayers. The papal court is a theater where sanctity and suspicion share the same stage. Historians still argue whether faith restrained poison or encouraged it. Some claim the fear of sin kept daggers sharper than vials. Others argue that ambition sanctified any tool. You see both in the scarlet cloth sweeping past you. As you leave, a clerk slips a folded note into your hand. The wax seal bears no crest, only a cross. Inside, a single line: beware the rings that shine too brightly in candlelight. You tuck it away, perhaps a warning, perhaps bait. Either way, survival means listening even to paper. Joke 2. You decide Rome should offer indulgences not for sins but for indigestion after papal banquets. You walk out into the evening where bells toll across tiled roofs. The fox on your ring feels heavier, as though it resents meeting cousins in the court of scarlet. You stroke it once, like a restless pet, then let your cloak fall over it. The city hums with prayers, promises, and poisons, and you step into the hum like a note, pretending to belong in the hymn. Joke 3. You whisper that Florence's wine tastes safer, which is a lie, but every survivor is allowed one lie before bed. You step out from the cloister's hush and into the city's real choir, gossip. It sings from baker doors and barber stools, from muleteers and money changers, from the boy hawking yesterday's news as if it were hatched this morning. Decrees wear seals, rumors wear shoes. They run. You follow at walking pace, because the secret of tracking a rumor is pretending you aren't. Joke 1. You consider invoicing gossip for rent, since it insists on living in your head. Under an archway sits a scribe with ink-stained fingers, selling sheets in a tidy hand. AVC, the handwritten newsletters that move faster than proclamations nailed to walls. Mainstream fact: 16th century Italy swam in these avvisi weekly, even daily, carried by couriers to courts and counting houses from Venice to Rome. Wars, marriages, tax murmurs, which ambassador sneezed at which banquet. All of it appears here before printers dare set type. You buy a sheet. The ink is still glistening, the names are half-coated, the way cooks refer to garlic as the friend. Historians still argue whether Avicii merely mirrored events or secretly bent them, whether their compilers were neutral notaries or moonlighting agents. You keep your coin purse light and your skepticism heavy. You read as you walk, a duke's fever, a shipment of alum delayed by snow, a bishop rumored to be transferred pole for his health, which means for politics. A sidebar lists prices, pepper up, saffron steady, you smile at your pouch, cinnamon dear enough to season a wedding. There's a note about a banquet accident, no names, cup exchanged in confusion. You feel your own goblet hand tighten. Even on paper, the city remembers the wrong tilt. Across the square, the barber's striped pole spins lazily. Inside, steam and laughter. You enter as if merely in need of a tidy beard. Barbers are surgeons here, practical philosophers with razors. Their shops collect news the way drains collect rain. A man in the chair sighs through soap suds about a cousin's debtor. A notary, waiting his turn, mutters that French cloth will ruin Florentine looms. The barber hums and corrects both with the authority of someone who has heard better versions already. Mainstream fact. Barber surgeons extracted teeth, cupped blood, stitched wounds, and stitched together rumor webs. Quirky tidbit. Some posted lists of lost items on their doors. Rings, gloves, reputations. Half joke, half ledger. You tip your chin. The blade kisses close. The barber whispers without moving lips. Avoid the Rivergate tonight. Your heart pauses. He pats your cheek as if blessing you. You leave with fewer hairs and more caution. In the piazza, a man in a leather apron is nailing up a bando, the official announcement. People cluster to read aloud for those who can't. Taxes on salt, penalties for night fighting, a reminder that knives in public must be shorter than a priest's patience. The crowd grumbles in polite chorus, then drifts to nearby stalls to repeat the bando in improved editions. This is how authority loses arm wrestling matches to rumor. The paper is straight, but the tongues bend it. You listen to the bend. Version 1 blames smugglers. Version 2 blames the Medici. Version 3 blames the moon. By the time you circle the square, Salt has acquired a conspiracy. You cross a bridge and stop where the city gossips at its most theatrical. On a battered pedestal stands an ancient torso. No arms, no head, yet the Romans call it a talking statue. By dawn, someone has pasted a lampoon to its chest. Pasquino, they name him. He speaks when the brave and the bored glue their rhymes to his stone. Today's verse needles a cardinal who loves rings that open without prayer. You wince at the accuracy disguised as meter. Quirky tidbit again. Rome's talking statues, Pasquino, Marforio, Abate Luigi, traded posted quips like pen pals, citizens staging a paper duel the censors could only chase, never catch. The sheet flaps, a boy reads it aloud with scandalized delight. An old woman clucks and recites a better version from memory. Your ring feels suddenly hot, though the air is cool. You slip your hand into your cloak. How many rumors were born from devices like the one you wear? And how many devices were born from rumors? Historians still argue whether infamous poison tales began with bodies or with poems, whether reality fed the lampoons or lampoons fed reality until a city could not taste dinner without tasting fear. You decide cause and effect dine together and split the bill. By habit, you test rumor's speed. You whisper a neutral truth to a spice seller you trust, alum delayed by snow, and then errand your feet through 3 streets and 2 courtyards. In 10 minutes, a loot maker informs you solemnly that German snows have conspired with Genoese bankers to strangle Florence. Congratulations, you think. The Aviso has found an orchestra. Joke 2. You decide if gossip were taxed, the Republic would pay off its debts by supper. At a bookseller's awning, a student exclaims about a treatise everyone has read except the men who ban it. The index of forbidden books will swell again, he predicts, as surely as rivers in spring. He is not wrong about the swelling, he is wrong about what it damns. Banned pages still travel tucked in cookbooks, in prayer book hollows, in the same sleeves that hide letters smelling of orange blossom. You glance down at the book of hours you bought last night, its clasps shut, its gilded edge as innocent as sugar on almonds. Rumor makes saints of pages and sinners of readers. You pause at a fountain. Women fill jugs and empty news. One claims a lady fainted at mass from too much lavender, which is how perfume becomes poisoned by noon. Another insists that a certain banker's crest, fox of all creatures, was seen at the mint after hours, which is how a private ceiling becomes a public suspicion. You let the water's echo thin their words to ripples. The line from your door returns to you. The river is patient. Yes, rumor is the river. It wears stone to agreement. In a shadowed loggia, two clerks trade subscriptions for their own Avisi, promising a northern edition twice weekly. You take one, flip to the last page, small notices like the size of a city, missing dog, missing servant, missing ring. The ring description is too precise. For a moment you feel exposed, then realize the bezel noted is square, the crest a ship, the hinge, if there is one, imaginary. Still, you slide your hand deeper into your cloak. The fox prefers shade. Not all rumor is spoken. A baker scratches a sign with the back of his knife. 3 short marks, meaning the tax man has already been by, or will be, or can be bought, depending on the neighborhood's dialect. A taverna chalks a fish on its door, even though it serves none. The fish means the back room is for cards until vespers. In alleys, laundry hung. One way means the master is away. Hung another, that he's drunk upstairs. The city semaphore is domestic and ruthless. You read it the way sailors read weather. As the hour turns, you tally the day's harvest. The river gate is dangerous. Barber. Salt will bruise the poor. Bondo. A cardinal's ring is too clever. Pasquino. Alum slides late through snow. Avisi. Upgraded by loots. And a fox was seen where foxes should not be. Fountain chorus. Threaded through all of it is last night's goblet accident. Retold now as policy, as scandal, as prophecy. Your job is to separate wind from bell. You arrange the notes in your head, weighting each by source and smell. Candle smoke from chancery, yeast from kitchens, ink from students, vinegar from lampoons. The city speaks in flavors. You trust your tongue. You choose one errand, not the river gate. You are not a moth, but the salt office, where grumbling becomes receipts. There, amid ledgers and sighs, the clerk confirms what gossip embroidered. Prices rise, exemptions fall, people will whisper the rest until it feels like fact. He stamps a form with a ring that could never hide a hinge, plain iron, honest as a bruise. The sound steadies you. Not every ring tells a story. Some only tell time. Dusk gathers. Decrees nail themselves to doors. Lampoons wake. The barber's pole stops spinning. You pocket a fresh aviso. The ink smell familiar now as bread. You have not used a drizzle under your bezel today. Rumor did your work for you and did it cheaper. Dose, you remind yourself of fear as much as powder. Joke 3. You promise yourself to invent an antidote labeled 2 spoonfuls of silence. You turn homeward through streets humming with recitations no one admits to memorizing. The fox on your ring lies cool again. Pietro will have a ledger open. Lucia will claim the geese told her everything already. You will add today's murmurings to tomorrow's map and sleep, if you can, inside a city that never stops talking, even in dreams. Night leans heavy as you return through Florence's arteries, and already the city is rearranging itself for another performance. Bells toll curfew. But curfew is only a suggestion, especially for those who live best when shutters close. You head toward the Via Calzaioli, where the great guild halls crouch like fat cats. Tonight, the air carries a sharper smell, the sour tang of sweat and leather. A duel is coming. Florence loves duels the way it loves frescoes, ostentatiously, dangerously, and always with an audience. Two men stand in the torchlight of the square, cloaks thrown off, steel glinting. They bow shallowly, less respect than contract. The crowd presses close, hungry for drama and blood but unwilling to pay for either. You edge near, ring turned inward, watching not as a spectator but as a student of survival. Mainstream fact: despite city laws banning street fights, duels flowered across Renaissance Italy. The manuals of fencing masters like Fuori degli Bari or Morozzo of Bologna taught elaborate stances: ox, boar's tooth, fool, each more theatrical than the last. But manuals rarely mention what you see now: trembling hands, shifting eyes, feet sliding on cobbles, slick with spilled wine. The blades clash, sparks spit briefly, then vanish in the torchlight. One man lunges too far, recovers, curses. His opponent presses, cloak wrapped around his arm as makeshift shield. You note every detail, the way his weight tips, the way the watching crowd holds its breath like a single organism. And then you notice what you were meant to notice. In the fist that holds the cloak, a ring flashes, thick bezeled, oddly heavy. You recognize the posture. It isn't only a duel, it's a message. Quirky tidbit: some fencing schools advise coating blades in oil or resin before duels, to rust opponents' steel or to make wounds fester. Some whispered of more: powders on hilts, toxin smeared along edges. Historians still argue whether such poisoned blades were real or just another rumor layered on Florence's already fevered paranoia. Tonight, watching the ring's sly wink, you feel the argument doesn't matter. Belief is sharper than steel. The fight ends quickly. A slip, a strike, a gasp, and the man with the bezeled ring stands panting over his rival. The loser clutches his thigh, blood blooming dark through fabric. The crowd disperses in murmurs, some admiring, some fearful, all eager to repeat their version in the nearest tavern. You stay still. The victor wipes his blade on the loser's cloak, then looks up. His eyes sweep the crowd, find yours, and linger one heartbeat too long. Recognition, warning, recruitment. The ring flashes once more, then he vanishes into the alley. You follow at a distance, not close enough to chase, not far enough to lose. He leads you past shuttered stalls, past frescoes that stare with saintly boredom, into a courtyard where the smell of blood is replaced by rosemary from a window box. He pauses, adjusts his cloak, then slips into a door you dare not enter. Still, you mark the place. Information is ablaze too. Historians still argue whether duels in Florence were about honor or theater, whether men risked lives for pride or simply for a better story to tell at supper. You suspect both and more. Tonight's duel was a stage and the ring was the script. You return to your quarters through back lanes, replaying every detail. The crowd's hush, the flash of the ring, the look that may have been invitation. Pietro lets you in, his eyebrows rising at the blood on your boots. You shake your head, not yours. He exhales, more ledger entry than relief. Lucia appears with a cloth anyway, kneeling to scrub at the cobbles where your steps might betray too much. Always leave floors cleaner than you found them, she mutters. Joke one. You tell her she should start a fencing school that teaches housekeeping as defense. She snorts and scrubs harder. You sit, pour wine, and dip bread. Pietro listens as you describe the ring, the duel, the gaze. He writes nothing. Some secrets stay safer in air. But he nods, committing the image to memory. Not yours alone, then. He says quietly. You agree. The fox has cousins. Quirky tidbit again. Certain fencing guilds adopted animal emblems, boars, lions, even cats, to brand their style. You wonder if rings travel in families the same way, crests multiplying like guild banners. Perhaps tonight's ring was boar to your fox, or lion to your fox, or wolf. Perhaps the city is a menagerie, and you're only one more beast prowling under torchlight. Later, as the house quiets, you stare at your own hand in lamplight. The ring sits silent, but the duel clings like smoke. You wonder if you saw your own reflection across the square, a man wielding secrecy in metal and paste, hiding danger in plain jewelry. Was that survival, or just a mirror reminding you how thin the distance is between killer and target? You extinguish the lamp. Darkness folds around you. Outside, Florence whispers of tonight's duel, shaping it already into a better story than truth. Tomorrow, you'll hear 10 versions, none exact. Only you will remember the ring flashing as if to say, you are not alone in this craft. Joke 2. You whisper into the dark that at least your fox looks less ridiculous than a boar's tooth. Joke 3. You add that if you must duel tomorrow, you'll bring Lucia's mop instead of a blade. Faster, quieter, and it leaves fewer stains. The duel's echoes follow you into morning. In Florence, stories grow overnight like mold, and by dawn, the city is already retelling what you saw with its usual embroidery. At the bakery queue, one man swears the loser was poisoned before the first strike. A woman insists the victor carried a charmed cloak, stitched by witches from Lucca. Neither was true, yet each gathers believers. Florence doesn't need facts, it needs rhythm. You head for the merchant quarter, where such rhythms are currency. Stalls clatter open, shutters lift, and the street smell of fresh bread and yesterday's sweat. This is where deals shape not only markets, but allegiances. Today, you must slip among merchants like another spool of cloth, indistinguishable yet essential. Joke 1. You remind yourself that commerce is just gossip with receipts. Mainstream fact. Florence's prosperity rode on the back of trade. Wool and silk made the city rich. Alum and dyes kept its colors brilliant. Banking carried Florentine florins across Europe. Yet beneath every ledger hid politics. Which guild backed which faction? Which merchant funded whose son's dowry? In this quarter, transactions were marriages with signatures. You walk beneath the carved line of the Mercato Nuovo, where traders spread fabrics and colors stolen from sunrise. Buyers stroke the cloth as if testing lovers. A merchant offers you velvet black as midnight, swearing it drinks candlelight. Another presses a bolt of crimson, claiming the dye cost more than a priest's conscience. You nod, smile, feign interest. But what you seek tonight is not fabric. It is the weave of conversation. A pair of merchants haggle in low tones. You edge close, appearing to browse ribbons. They whisper of a shipment delayed, a ledger doctored, a coin chest light by several florins. You catch one phrase, the ring, and your ears sharpen. They are not speaking of wedding bands. They lower their voices further, but the word has already lit a fuse in your thoughts. Quirky tidbit, guild members often wore small emblem rings as proof of trade allegiance. Keys for locksmiths, spindles for weavers, scales for merchants. But rumors wove darker tales, that certain merchants commissioned rings with hidden compartments, less for sealing wax than for sealing fates. Historians still argue whether this was exaggeration born of envy, or whether such jewelry truly circulated beneath sleeves. You drift on, pretending not to care, but every word now sounds edged. At a spice stall, you hear a man mutter that a banker paid double for saffron, not for paella, but for paper. At a jeweler's bench, you glimpse a bezel polished too smooth. its hinge disguised as a flourish of vine leaves. He calls it novelty. You call it possibility. One merchant greets you with exaggerated warmth. He sells ledgers, ink, quills, the innocent tools of commerce, yet his ink pots are oddly heavy. He lifts one, shakes it, and smiles as if daring you to guess what else it holds. Merchants deal in permanence, he says. You smile back. Permanence in Florence usually means silence. Historians still argue whether poisons ever traveled along the same routes as pepper and cinnamon, slipped in barrels labeled as nutmeg or cloves. Evidence is thin, but gossip is fat. Tonight, you believe both. A vial hidden in saffron could change more than flavor. A ring brushed against parchment could seal more than wax. By midday, you pause in the loggia, where bankers count coins beneath frescoed ceilings. Gold clinks like raindrops. Contracts are sworn, interest tallied. Here, survival depends on figures written clearly, but you know those figures are ghosts unless trust underwrites them. And trust, in Florence, is always rented by the hour. Joke 2. You decide bankers invented poison rings just so their ledgers wouldn't be the deadliest thing in the room. You exit into sun that feels almost honest. Almost. From a balcony above, a merchant's wife scatters lavender on her shutters. The scent drifts down, sweet and familiar, reminding you again of letters, books, beds warmed with sprigs. Lavender, Florence's camouflage for secrets. You breathe it in, half comfort, half warning. Back at your lodging, Pietro already waits with a list of names gathered from servants' gossip. One in particular makes you pause. A cloth merchant, known for velvet, rumored to own a ring thicker than fashion. Lucia confirms she saw him at market, clasping customers' hands too firmly, too often. You exchange glances with Pietro. The city is circling back on you. That night, alone at your table, you study your own fox signet. The paste within waits patiently, drizzle asleep, storm unborn. You think of the duel, of the merchant's whispers, of the jeweler's vine leaf bezel. You are not the only fox in Florence. The ring on your hand is a tool, yes, but also a mirror. When you look into it, you see the city staring back. Joke 3. You tell yourself Florence is nothing but a jewelry box where half the trinkets hold poison and the other half hold debts. The morning after the marketplace whispers, Florence greets you with bells and unease. The story of the duel has already been folded into half a dozen different shapes. One version claims the loser confessed to treachery, another swears the victor used a bewitched blade, a third insists no duel happened at all. Survival, you remind yourself, isn't about which version is true. It's about knowing which version people believe. Today you are summoned, not to a market or banquet, but to the dark stare of a magistrate's office. The city has noticed the duel, the rumors, the scent of poison in the air. It always notices. And when Florence notices, it interrogates. Mainstream fact. Renaissance justice was swift, loud, and terrifying. Trials were often public. Interrogations sometimes private, but rarely gentle. Torture was legal, justified as a way to wring truth out of stubborn lips. Yet beneath the iron, the system still relied on performance. A confession heard by the right ears mattered more than evidence written on paper. Historians still argue whether confessions born of pain were believed, or merely useful fictions everyone agreed to pretend were true. You descend into the magistrate's hall, where frescoes of virtue stare grimly from the walls. The air is damp, reeking of mildew and sweat. In the center, a prisoner kneels, wrists bound, head bowed. His shirt clings with old blood. A guard adjusts the ropes that bind his arms, tightening with the patience of someone knitting a death. The magistrate enters, robes sweeping like judgment. He speaks not to the prisoner, but to the scribe waiting with quill poised. Write, he commands, though nothing has yet been said. Already, truth has been decided. Words are just the ink to match. You watch from the side as the questioning begins. The prisoner insists on innocence. He swears he knows nothing of rings, powders, goblets. The magistrate nods, patient, then signals. A crank squeals. The prisoner gasps. His body stretched by ropes that seem hungrier than men. His voice cracks, then pours out names. Some are likely enemies, some are surely innocent, but in this chamber, distinction dissolves. Quirky tidbit. Records survive of Renaissance torturers employed not for brutality, but for rhythm. They learned to pause, to slacken, to let prisoners breathe just long enough to speak clearly. Some even sang as they worked, believing melody coaxed confession faster. You think of the lute player at the tavern, her pauses full of secret phrases. Music, it seems, can carry both beauty and torment. The scribe scratches steadily, recording words like recipes. The magistrate leans close, asking again about poison. The prisoner hesitates, then breaks. He whispers of a merchant's ring, of a banquet where wine tastes of almonds, of a servant who vanished after touching a goblet. Each detail, whether true or borrowed, becomes a nail hammered into paper. Historians still argue whether torture revealed plots or invented them. You do not need their debate. You can see invention blooming in real time, written down as fact. Yet the effect is the same. Suspicion spreads, names stain. Florence gains another excuse to tighten its net. The magistrate turns to you suddenly, his eyes sharp. "You trade," he says. "You hear. What do you know of rings?" His words hang like hooks. You bow, smile, offer the safest truth cloaked in a merchant language. You have seen signets used for wax, rings filled with perfume, but never more. Lies? Yes. Safe? For now. Joke 1. You almost add that the only rings you care about are on sausages. But magistrates are not known for sausage humor. The prisoner cries out again, another name flung into the scribe's book. You listen carefully. Each name could be a shield or a trap. You file them in your memory, not to believe, but to survive. The magistrate waves a hand, and the guard eases the ropes. The man slumps, sobbing, his words spent. The scribe blots the parchment with sand. Truth, Florence style, is now ready for the archive. You leave the hall, the sound of the crank still echoing in your ears. Outside, the sun feels like a lie, too bright, too clean. The street smells of bread again, but even bread seems guilty now. Pietro meets you with raised brows. Lucia watches silently from behind him. You shake your head. Later. That night, in your chamber, you turn the fox signet slowly, letting lamplight flash across its crest. The drizzle inside sleeps, storm unborn, but you can feel how thin the line is between using it and having it used against you. Torture may not need poison, but rumor says it does. And rumor feeds itself until it's fat enough to crush anyone caught beneath. Joke 2. You mutter that Florence should skip ropes and racks and just make prisoners sit through tax lectures. Faster, cheaper, equally unbearable. You dip a quill, write a note in your own ledger. Never be the loudest name in a confession. You underline it twice. Then you close the book, tuck it under your cloak, and breathe lavender from the sprig Lucia has left at your bedside. It calms you enough to sleep. Joke 3. You tell yourself dreams are Florence's kindest interrogators. They wring confessions without leaving bruises. The morning brings you to the square, where Florence gathers for justice. Not whispered justice, like in the magistrate's hall, but public justice, the kind everyone can point at and repeat until it becomes memory. The piazza smells of ash, sweat, and bread. The city never forgets to feed itself, even as it prepares to watch someone else starve of mercy. At the center stands a scaffold, hastily built yet grimly familiar. Executioners in dark leather adjust ropes, grotesque pulleys, sharpened blades, pretending at ritual, though they are craftsmen like any other. The crowd swells with the strange hunger of spectators, their chatter nervous and eager. Survival in Florence often means knowing when not to be noticed, so you keep to the edges, hood drawn low. Mainstream fact: Renaissance executions were both punishment and theater. Hanging, burning, beheading, each carried its own choreography. Sometimes criminals were marched through streets beforehand, a grim parade meant to warn as much as condemn. Chroniclers recorded these scenes as if they were spectacles, noting the crowd's applause or gasps as carefully as a poet notes rhymes. Historians still argue whether executions reduced crime or simply fed Florence's appetite for drama. Tonight, you see only appetite. The condemned is led forward, pale but steady. His crime, announced in a booming voice, is treachery with poison. Whether true or not, the words matter more than deeds. A murmur rolls through the square, the crowd tasting the story as if it were wine. You feel your hand close over your box signet unconsciously, as though the accusation might leap across space to seize you too. The executioner raises the cup found in the man's quarters, a silver goblet, its rim blackened by time or by something less innocent. The crowd hisses. The magistrate proclaims it evidence enough, though no proof could satisfy Florence's thirst for spectacle better than a tarnished cup. The man protests weakly, but the rope and blade speak louder. In moments his voice is cut short, and the square exhales as if justice itself were a lung. Quirky tidbit. In some Italian cities, pieces of execution rope were sold afterward as charms against illness or curses. People paid dearly for these grisly souvenirs, convinced a fragment of death might purchase life. You watch as, already, someone in the crowd tugs at the end of the rope, whispering offers of coin. Florence wastes nothing, not even fear. You study the faces around you, some gleeful, some uneasy, all eager to retell the story tonight in taverns. Children perched on shoulders gape wide-eyed. Old women shake heads as if pretending not to enjoy the show. You feel a chill as you realize the true punishment is not the rope, but the memory the city will keep repeating long after the man's body is buried. Historians still argue whether most of those accused of poisoning were truly guilty or merely convenient scapegoats. A servant dismissed, a rival silenced, a debtor erased. Poison accusations made excellent tools for politics. The scaffold, then, is less a grave than a ledger, balancing Florence's accounts in public view. Joke 1. You whisper to yourself that Florence should charge admission and call it theater. It would at least be honest. The body is carried away, the crowd disperses, and already the story mutates in a dozen directions. One version says he confessed at the last second. Another insists he cursed his enemies. A boy runs past, shouting that he saw a second ring fall from the man's pocket. None of it is provable, all of it is alive. You return to your lodging heavy with the lesson. Survival is not only avoiding poison, but avoiding becoming the story others want to tell. Pietro takes your cloak, eyes searching yours. You nod once. He understands enough without words. Lucius sets bread and broth before you, muttering that the square stank of garlic and lies. You eat quietly, grateful for both their presences. That night, lying awake, you imagine your own ring displayed at a scaffold, its hinge gaped open for the crowd to hiss at. You see strangers pressing forward, eager to buy shavings of the fox crest as charms. You shiver and close your eyes. Joke 2. You decide if you must be executed, you'll demand at least to choose the music. Sleep creeps slow. The lavender sprig on your pillow helps, though it smells now of guilt as much as calm. You dream of goblets tilting wrong, of crowds chanting, of ropes coiled like serpents. You wake before dawn, sweating. Joke 3. You murmur that at least nightmares don't charge admission either. Florence will not let you forget today's spectacle, but neither will you let Florence forget. You are still breathing, still walking its alleys, still holding secrets it cannot quite catch. Survival tonight is silence and shadow. Dawn is thin and watery when it creeps across the rooftops. You wake to the sound of bells calling bakers, not penitents, and to the smell of bread already moving through alleys. Florence always balances death with dough. The city refuses to end a night without beginning another morning. You sip watered wine from a clay cup, your throat still tight with the memory of yesterday's scaffold. Survival means feeding your body even when your stomach does not want food. You decide the day must be quieter, though in Florence, quiet still rattles like dice. You take the lanes toward the Apothecary's Row, a street that always smells like a quarrel between flowers and fire. Here you might find an antidote worth trusting, or at least a placebo strong enough to calm your nerves. Mainstream fact: antidotes were prized in Renaissance Italy. Theriac, the famous cure-all, was compounded from dozens of ingredients: opium, myrrh, cinnamon, even viper flesh, aged like fine wine and sold at astronomical prices. Apothecaries staged public ceremonies when preparing it, blending myth with medicine. Historians still argue whether theriac was genuinely medicinal or merely a lucrative placebo. Either way, it sold, and selling was half the cure. The first shop you enter is lined with blue and white majolica jars painted with saints and serpents. The apothecary bows as though you were nobility, then immediately offers theriac in a small gilded box, as if poison never travels alone. You ask instead for bezoar stones. He produces one wrapped in red silk, swearing it came from an oriental goat stomach. Joke 1. You nearly ask if he offers a warranty, but the man's earnest eyes convince you to swallow the question. You weigh the stone in your hand. It is heavy, unremarkable, utterly convincing in its blandness. Quirky tidbit. Bezoars were so valued that some kings paid fortunes for them, and one physician even tested them by dropping poison into wine, then stirring with the stone. Results were mixed, but the belief remained strong. You hand the bezoar back. Belief is useful, but you cannot afford to carry someone else's superstition when you already carry your own. The second shop smells sharply of vinegar and rosemary. A younger apothecary bustles, her hand stained with saffron and ink. She offers a syrup of rue and sage, calling it a protector of hearts. You sip a drop, bitter as gossip, but oddly soothing. She smiles knowingly, placebo or not, it works if you let it. Historians still debate whether such herbal syrups did more than calm the nerves. Tonight, you decide calm nerves alone are medicine enough. You leave with a vial of syrup tucked into your pouch beside the fox ring. Already you feel steadier, though perhaps it is only because having an antidote makes you walk straighter. In the piazza outside, a crowd has gathered around a traveling mountebank. He leaps onto a barrel, cloak swirling, and begins to preach, not of sin, but of cures. He brandishes a bottle of dark liquid, swearing it will protect against all poisons, lengthen life, and restore lost hair. The crowd laughs, but coins still clink into his hat. Joke 2. You mutter to yourself that Florence should appoint him treasurer. He makes taxes look voluntary. The mountebank demonstrates by letting a dog lick a drop from his palm, then declares the animal safe. The dog looks unconcerned, but you notice its ribs, its thirst. The trick is not the cure, but the show. You smile despite yourself. In a city where poison is rumor's favorite word, antidotes will always sell, especially those bottled with confidence. Quirky tidbit again. Some mountebanks carry their own poisoners, accomplices, who pretended to sicken and then revive after swallowing a dose of the cure. Whether the trick used emetics, herbs, or sheer theater, it never failed to impress. You watch as one such accomplice staggers forward, coughs theatrically, drinks, and promptly recovers to applause. The crowd believes, the coins multiply. You tuck the memory away. Performance can be its own antidote. By afternoon, you retreat to your lodging. Pietro raises a brow at the vial you set on the table. Lucia sniffs it and shrugs. Better than rope, she says. You agree. You pour a drop into water, sip again, and let the bitterness remind you you're still alive. Historians still argue whether antidotes save more lives than they claimed, or whether their value was purely psychological. Perhaps both. Tonight, survival tastes like rue and sage, sharp and unyielding. The drizzle sleeps still in your ring, but the antidote hums in your pouch, a twin reminder. Death can be hidden in small bottles, but so can hope. You lie down as dusk gathers, lavender tucked again under your pillow. The city beyond your shutters whispers the day's news, another arrest, another rumor, another duel. You let it fade. Joke 3. You murmur that Florence should bottle lavender as an antidote to itself. Sleep comes, not quickly but gently, like an antidote measured in drops. Florence wakes restless, and so do you. The city has eaten too many rumors in the last week, and now it coughs them back up as accusations. Today, you feel it before you hear it. A tension in the streets, a tightening of voices, as though everyone is leaning closer to listen for the wrong word. You know what this means? Someone has been accused formally. The Palazzo della Signoria looms like a lion over the square, its tower stabbing the morning sky. You move with the crowd, blending, listening. A crier rats charges from the loggia, treason, conspiracy, the word veleno, poison, spoken slowly so all can taste it. The accused is a minor official, a man too ordinary to be memorable until now. He is let out, pale, bound, his eyes darting for friends that no longer exist. Mainstream fact. In Renaissance Florence, accusations often served as political tools. Trials could be genuine, but more often they were orchestrated performances designed to show the Republic vigilant. Historians still argue whether most poison plots were real or fabricated, but the records agree on one truth. The accusation itself was enough to ruin, regardless of evidence. You watch as the man is paraded through the square, people spit, others cheer, some cross themselves as though poison were contagious by glance. You remain still. The crowd is the most dangerous weapon in Florence. It needs no blade, no vial, no ring. It kills with memory. The accused is dragged into the palazzo's belly, to the same halls you visited days ago. Pietro once told you the walls, they remember every scream, and you believe him. You do not follow inside, but you linger in the piazza where gossip begins to braid itself. One woman swears she saw the man's servant buying almonds. Always almonds, the flavor of suspicion. Another insists he wore a ring thicker than fashion, though you never saw such a ring on his hand. Already, evidence is being manufactured in the air. Quirky tidbit. Almonds were so strongly associated with poison that some cooks avoided them in noble households, fearing even an innocent marzipan could spark whispers. Yet, almond sweets remained popular, proof that Florence's appetite always outran its caution. The trial begins behind stone walls. You cannot see it, but the murmurs leak out, questions, denials, shouts, the creak of the same ropes you heard before. By midday, the verdict is already written in the crowd's eyes. Guilt is certain, only the punishment remains undecided. Historians still argue whether Florence's justice was crueler than other cities or simply better chronicled. You decide the difference is irrelevant to those kneeling on stone floors, waiting for verdicts. Justice here is not a scale, but a stage, and the city loves its theater. When the accused emerges again, he is broken, shirt torn, face wet, words slurred. He confesses loudly to whatever the magistrates require. He names names, some true, some fabricated, all deadly. The crowd cheers as if they've won a battle. You know better. Florence has merely fed itself another story. Joke 1. You whisper that the city should issue tickets for trials, with balcony seats priced higher. That night, the accused is marched through torchlit streets to the Bargello. Children run alongside, laughing. Dogs bark. Windows open to spill candlelight onto the procession. You walk parallel, hidden in shadows, watching how quickly an ordinary man has become a cautionary tale. Back in your chamber, Pietro records names from the confession in his secret ledger. Lucia mutters that the man was guilty only of bad wine purchases. You sip from your vial of rue syrup, bitterness grounding you. The fox on your ring gleams faintly in lamplight, its drizzle still sleeping, storm still unborn. You wonder how many more will be accused before suspicion turns its gaze toward you. Joke 2. You say aloud that Florence has invented a new currency, fear, more stable than gold and easier to mint. Pietro almost smiles. Before bed, you write one line in your own private book. Accusation is poison enough. You underline it twice, then close the cover. Lavender waits on your pillow, but its scent feels thinner tonight, stretched too far to calm you completely. You lie awake long after the city sleeps, listening for footsteps at your door. Joke 3. You tell yourself if they come, you'll accuse the geese first. Let the birds carry Florence's gossip for a change. Sleep finally comes, brittle as glass. You dream of almond sweets on silver plates, each one a confession in sugar. The city wakes uneasy again, and today it is the prisons that groan. The Bargello's heavy doors open just long enough for guards to march out a file of prisoners, shackled 2 by 2. Their chains clink like coins in a purse too full. You follow at a distance, blending into the stream of onlookers who always appear when Florence puts its misery on parade. The procession winds toward the Arno, past taverns shuttered at this hour, past shrines where saints look away. The prisoners stumble, some shouting innocence, others muttering prayers. One is silent, his eyes fixed on the cobbles as if memorizing each stone. Mainstream fact. Florence used public processions not only for executions, but for humiliation, parading debtors, heretics, or accused poisoners through the streets. It was civic theater, designed to burn faces into memory. Historians still argue whether the practice deterred crime or simply entertained crowds, but the effect was undeniable. Florence learned its lessons by watching other people suffer. You drift closer when the column halts at a crossroads. A magistrate reads charges from a parchment, his voice booming: treason, theft, heresy, veleno. That last word ripples through the crowd like smoke. You feel your own ring heavy on your finger, its fox crest silent but accusing. One prisoner shouts that he has never touched poison, that he cannot even afford almonds, the city's favorite flavor of suspicion. The crowd laughs cruelly, then falls silent when the guards jerk his chain. His protests dissolve into coughs. Quirky tidbit. Some prisoners bribed guards to let them drink wine before execution, believing it dulled pain or masked fear. Others chewed garlic, thinking its pungency would confuse poisons lingering in their bodies. Garlic breath as shield. Florence finds defenses in every kitchen. The procession resumes. The crowd swells at corners, eager to glimpse guilt. Mothers lift children to their shoulders, as if parading crime were part of their education. You remember the informer in the prison whispering names against damp walls, and wonder which of these men was sold by those whispers. Historians still argue whether informers prolonged their own lives or merely signed the warrant for their neighbors. You decide. Both can be true. The prisoners are led finally to a small platform near the river. Some will be whipped, some branded, one hanged. The branding iron glows and coals, hissing softly. The crowd murmurs, restless. The silent prisoner, the one who never spoke, finally raises his head. His eyes sweep the crowd, and for a terrifying heartbeat, they lock with yours. You look away quickly. Survival in Florence means never being recognized by the condemned. Joke 1. You tell yourself the city should hand out programs with each punishment. Today's cast, thief, debtor, alleged poisoner. The punishments begin. The whip cracks, the iron hisses, the rope creaks. The crowd gasps and sighs in rhythm, a chorus that never misses its cue. You keep your hood low, your expression blank. Each cry feels like a warning written in air. This could be you. When it ends, the guards herd the survivors back into the bargello, leaving stains on the wood and murmurs in the street. Already the crowd retells the spectacle. The silent one must have been guilty, the shouter innocent, or perhaps the other way around. The truth no longer matters. What matters is the story Florence will carry home. You slip away down an alley where the smell of river water masks blood. Pietro meets you there, face drawn. He is hurt already. The silent prisoner was once a clerk in a banker's household, dismissed quietly weeks ago. Rumor says he carried a ring too heavy for a clerk's wages. The fox on your finger burns colder. That night, you sit with Pietro and Lucia in the dim kitchen. She pours wine, thick and sour, but steadying. Pietro notes each prisoner's name, each charge, in his secret ledger. You add one more line in your own hand. Punishment is a story told to keep the city awake. Joke 2. You mutter that Florence doesn't need guards, only playwrights. The punishments stage themselves. Later, alone, you study your ring in lamplight. You imagine it displayed on a prisoner's hand, shouted about from a scaffold, remembered by children on shoulders. You tuck it under your pillow, a foolish gesture, as though hiding it from your own dreams. Sleep brings no rest. You dream of processions where every prisoner wears your face, every chain rattles like your heartbeat, every charge ends with the same word, veleno. You wake gasping, lavender faint but loyal at your bedside. Joke 3. You whisper hoarsely that if the city insists on parading prisoners, it should at least teach them better marching songs. Florence sleeps, you do not. The chains still echo. The morning after the procession, Florence seems quieter, though you know it is only catching its breath. The city never stays silent. It only pauses to sharpen its tongue. You move through streets that smell of wet stone and frying oil, ears tuned for the next threat of danger. It doesn't take long. By midday, you hear whisper of a plot, bigger than a merchant's rivalry, bigger even than a poisoned goblet at a banquet. This one carries a family name, and in Florence, family names are armies. The Pazzi, the Medici. Everyone knows their feud. Everyone pretends not to. Today, rumor claims someone plans to end the feud in a single stroke, with steel perhaps, or with poison smuggled into a chalice at high mass. The story shifts depending on who retells it, but the heart is the same. Someone powerful may not survive Sunday. Mainstream fact. The Pazzi conspiracy of 1478 became one of Florence's most infamous plots. Historians still argue how many were involved, how much the Pope knew, whether the poison stories that lingered around the event were truth or slander. What is certain is that daggers did fly, blood did stain the cathedral, and Florence remembered it for centuries. You pass a corner where apprentices argue in the open, voices low but fierce. One claims the conspirators tested a ring filled with quicksilver, brushing it across fruit to prove its strength. Another laughs, swearing the Medici employ tasters immune to venom after years of training. both could be true or neither. You keep walking, because survival isn't about winning arguments, it's about not being overheard in them. In the loggia of a guild hall, men whisper more soberly. They talk of banquet invitations, of pews in the cathedral, of rings and daggers both. You linger at the edge, pretending to admire frescoes, but every phrase enters your ledger. Quirky tidbit. Conspirators often chose church services for plots, thinking the sacred setting would disarm suspicion. Ironically, sanctity made the stage grander, the betrayal sharper. Florence remembered sins better when they were committed beneath frescoed ceilings. By evening, Pietro brings word from servants' mouths. A shipment of figs delivered to a noble household disappeared too quickly, though no one claims to have eaten them. Another servant swears he saw a jeweler polishing a ring bezel too thick for ornament. Lucia adds her own contribution, muttering that geese in one courtyard refuse to settle, honking until midnight. Animals notice what people prefer to ignore. Historians still argue whether poison ever truly sat at the table during the Patsy conspiracy, or whether later retellings embroidered the tale with venom to suit Florence's appetite for drama. You suspect the truth is simpler. Steel did the work, but poison always lurks in the margins, ready to season memory. That night, in your chamber, you polish your own fox signet by candlelight. You test the hinge, drizzle not storm, watching paste gleam faintly before sealing it away again. You tell yourself you will not use it tomorrow or the day after, but the truth is you do not know. Florence may demand it, and Florence does not wait for refusals. Joke 1. You murmur that conspiracies are Florence's favorite festival. Cheaper than Carnival, with longer parades. You sip rue syrup from your vial, bitterness grounding you, and add a note in your ledger. Conspiracies breed like pigeons. Only hawks thin them out. You underline the word hawks twice. As you douse the candle, lavender rises faintly from your pillow. You close your eyes, but sleep carries visions of a cathedral crowded with masked faces, goblets tilted wrong, and rings flashing like signals in the dark. Joke 2. You decide that if Florence keeps inventing conspiracies, someone should at least sell tickets with reserved seating. Joke 3. You add that pew cushions would help. Betrayal is uncomfortable enough without wooden benches. You roll onto your side. The fox on your ring presses cool against your cheek. Florence breathes outside, preparing its next act. You breathe with it, unsure if you are audience, actor, or sacrifice. Florence holds its breath before Sunday. Streets that normally thrum with bargaining now mutter with caution. Every doorway seems to have ears. Every tavern corner watches. You feel it most in the cathedral itself, where you step on polished stone that has heard more prayers than Florence has coins. The Duomo towers above, its dome catching sunlight, but inside the air is shadow and incense. You drift among the faithful, hood lowered. Bells echo like iron hearts. Candles smoke, saints stare down from frescoes, and worshippers cross themselves with hands that tremble less from piety than from nerves. Mainstream fact, the Duomo was not just a church but a stage for politics. Families bought chapels, sponsored altars, competed for space in marble the way others competed in markets. On feast days, the city squeezed inside shoulder to shoulder, suspicion packed as tight as devotion. Today, rumors thicken the incense. Whispers of a plot hover over every pew. Some say poison in the chalice, others say daggers hidden in hymnals. Historians still argue whether poison ever had a place in the Pazzi plot, or whether later tongues salted the tale to flavor it. But here, in the cathedral's dim belly, you can believe anything. You slide into a pew near the back. The fox on your ring gleams faintly in the candlelight. It's drizzle waiting, storm unborn. You keep your hand beneath your cloak, but the weight feels louder than bells. You imagine other rings in the crowd, thicker bezels, flashing when no one looks. Perhaps you're not the only one carrying a secret hinge today. The mass begins. Chant swells, Latin rolling like tide. Priests lift chalices, gilded, heavy. Every tilt of wine looks wrong to your eyes. You watch lips touch cups, throats swallow, hands tremble. Joke 1. You mutter silently that Florence's true miracle is surviving communion at all. Then movement. A man shifts too quickly near the front. Another grips his sleeve. For a breath, the whole cathedral stiffens, ready for a conspiracy to burst like thunder. But it passes. A cough, a stumble, nothing more. Still, the tension clings. Florence does not forgive false alarms. It files them under evidence delayed. Quirky tidbit. Some nobles brought their own chalices to mass. Small traveling cups polished like relics. They claimed it was for devotion, but everyone knew it was for safety. If you drink from your own cup, at least you can blame only yourself. You glance at the chalices raised today, none personal, all communal. A brave choice or a foolish one. The service continues. Whispers trickle. Did you see his hand? The wine is too dark. That ring, too heavy. You close your eyes and breathe incense. Even prayer here smells like politics. Historians still argue what was truly planned that day in 1478. Was poison meant as backup if daggers failed? Was the story of poison later embroidered by Medici propaganda to paint enemies darker? You let the questions turn slowly in your head. The answers don't matter to survival. What matters is knowing that Florence will believe whichever tale suits its hunger. When the mass ends, the crowd pours out into sun. Faces are flushed, eyes sharp, no blood spilled, no chalices tainted, but the rumor has grown anyway. By tonight, some will swear poison was attempted and thwarted by divine intervention. Others will swear they saw daggers gleam before being hidden again. Florence will feast on both versions. You slip into an alley, the dome looming overhead like a lid on a boiling pot. Pietro joins you, his expression tight. He heard the same whispers from another pew. Lucia appears moments later, her apron smudged with flour from her alibi at the bakery. Together, you walk quickly, quietly saying little. Back in your chamber, you record the day in your ledger. Plot suspected. Proof absent. Fear abundant. You underline fear. The fox on your ring rests heavy on the page as you write, as if sealing the words itself. Joke 2. You sigh that Florence should build a second cathedral just to hold its conspiracy separately. Joke 3. You add that pew cushions are still the more urgent reform. Night comes. Lavender on your pillow, rue syrup bitter on your tongue, footsteps soft in the courtyard. Florence survived the day, but the city is not satisfied. Neither are you. You dream of chalices tilting endlessly, each drop both blessing and curse. You sit at the small table by your shuttered window and listen, while Florence sighs itself toward sleep. Street cries fade, the baker's last batch cools, a tired mule clops past like a metronome set too slow for mischief. You touch the fox on your ring and feel only metal, not menace. The hinge that spent so many hours like a held breath is quiet now. Drizzle asleep inside the bezel. Storm still the story that did not happen. You have carried the paste, the vial, the letters, the lavender. You have carried fear and let it ride like a careful passenger. You have carried yourself through a city that prefers its truths perfumed. You think of the apothecary's cat conducting midnight inspections from the rafters, of Theriac dark as a sermon, of the Bezoar that pretended to be a stone and almost convinced you. You think of the lute player and her pauses, of the barber's blade humming news, of Pasquino's lampoon laughing with its mouth made of stone. You think of the gondola's oar, dip, lift, breathe, and of the river's patience, and of the note that warned you with those same quiet words. You think of Lucia's sprigs of lavender slipped into sheets, and Pietro's keys ringing softly like honest bells. Survival, you realize, is usually a chorus sung under the melody. Mainstream fact comes to you as gently as sleep. This city of bankers and builders taught Europe to count with 2 columns at once, debit and credit, double entry bookkeeping turning risk into legible ink, as much a Florentine invention as a fresco or a dome. The method has the same calm as your ring when it stays shut, recording without panic, balancing without drama. You learned in your own way to keep 2 columns too, what is said and what is meant. Outside, the wind lifts the laundry lines that cross your alley and sets the shirt swaying like half-remembered ghosts that decided against haunting. The moon makes every cobble a coin. Somewhere, geese declare an emergency that sounds suspiciously like bedtime. You smile, because in this town, even a goose has opinions. Quirky tidbit drifts up. Some households swore by night pomanders, little silver fruit stuffed with clove and musk to fend off bad air and worse dreams, swung from the bedpost like tiny moons. You picture one ticking its slow, fragrant orbit in a dark room, an antidote worn thin by comfort. Historians still argue whether the Renaissance truly swam in poison or only in the fear of it, whether rings like yours did much more than inspire novels yet unwritten, whether theriac soothed the stomach or merely gave it something expensive to consider. They also argue whether alarms like geese and lampoons saved more lives than antidotes ever did. You ease your shoulders and decide that arguments feed scholars, while caution feeds survivors. What you know is simpler. Tonight, your hand never tipped a cup the wrong way, and your breath still belongs to you. You let yourself laugh quietly, kindly at your own expense. Joke 1. You consider opening a new establishment across from the apothecary and calling it the Alibi, where the only thing served is reasons to go home early. Joke 2. You think of designing a fashionable sleeping signet that seals nothing but naps, marketed to bankers who would gladly authenticate 8 uninterrupted hours. Joke 3. You promise yourself someday you'll present Lucia with an honorary fencing diploma because her mop has disarmed more hazards than any sword you've watched. You reach for the book of hours you bought beneath the archway and let the clasps click open. The gilded edges catch the lamplight, harmless under your fingers because you have chosen harmless. The page you land on is a night office again, in manus tuas domine, and you whisper the line without bargaining. Into your hands, into your pocket, into your breath. You remember the letter that smelled of orange blossom and the mistress who opened it without leaving a scar. You remember the prison informer pressed against cold stone. You remember the duel's blink of steel, the masquerade's sugar, the Alps' thin, clean air that scoured your thoughts until only necessary ones could hold. You stand, finally, and lift the window latch. Cool air pours in, gentle as a hand smoothing a crease. The dome sits against the sky like a held note. The city's last carts rumble. The barber-striped pole has given up its spin. A watchman calls the hour with a voice that sounds older than his boots. You place the fox signet on the table and slide the vial into the chest with the twine and the penknife and the ledger of names that aren't entirely yours. They are close if needed, distant if not. That too is survival, knowing where you keep the quiet things. The room smells faintly of iron, linen, and lavender. Pietro has laid the keys where you can find them without looking. Lucia's bed warmer leans cold against the hearth, its coals spent to kindness. The drizzle under your ring is not a promise. It is a possibility. Possibility is not destiny. The true ring you have worn, all night and every night, is the habit of attention. The fox's wisdom was never teeth, it was noticing. You lie down and pull the sheet to your chin, and when your thoughts try to stage another banquet on the ceiling, You deny them an audience. Let the servants of memory stack chairs, dim lamps, sweep away confetti no one admits they threw. Let the river carry rumor to the sea where it will salt itself into something harmless. The apothecary's cat at last curls into sleep. The barber's razor cools. The alchemist's dew settles on clean linen until dawn decides to be reasonable. Somewhere, a gondola bumps a mooring and is grateful for knots. So are you. You close your eyes and feel the steady pulse that outlasts fashions, factions, and the wrong tilt of a goblet. The city breathes in, breathes out. You match it. Shutters settle. The ring does not. You awake with it still there, unspent. A tool owned by your judgment rather than owning it. The poisons blur at the edges of thought, smudged by sleep into the soft charcoal of lessons kept, hazards named, exits memorized. Survival, here at the end of the night, sounds like a fan's low hum, smells like lavender, tastes like water that remembers stone. You are tired enough to surrender, but not so tired you forget who you are. You drift. The pacing softens now, and the edges of the room grow warm and unimportant, and every sharp thing that has followed you through these streets becomes round and slow and far away. Your breath lengthens as the night stretches, and the bed feels wider than Florence, and the window holds nothing but a dark, kind sky. The city that could not stop talking has grown considerate at last, speaking only in small, friendly noises. The faint tap of a shutter, the distant answer of a bell, the sleepy argument of a cart and a cobblestone that will make their peace in the morning. You let the weight of the sheets persuade your shoulders downward, and you let the memory of lantern light drift to the back of your thoughts until it becomes a soft ribbon, easy to tuck away. The river moves somewhere out there, unhurried and exact, and whatever it carries can continue without you for a while. The rumors will keep their own company. The letters will arrive exactly when they mean to. The cat will continue its patrols, and the moon will mind its patient rounds across roof tiles. You allow yourself to become smaller in your mind. Smaller than a ring, smaller than a spoonful of theriac, smaller than a word written in the margin of a ledger, and in becoming small, you become safe, because nothing small needs to be found. In and out, the rhythm that requires no instrument, only your ribs and a little borrowed night air. Think of lavender, not as a sprig, but as a color you can rest inside. Think of water, not as a river or cup, but as a cool thought that waits at your bedside. Think of morning, not as a demand, but as a curtain that will rise very slowly when you are ready to watch another scene. And if a fragment of worry tries to speak, let it speak once, then let it yawn, then let it curl up at the foot of the bed like a satisfied watchdog. You are here, you are whole, and for now that is the only oath the city requires. Sleep arrives quietly, as if it has known the way all along.